Welcome, dear friend, to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient wisdom meets peaceful slumber. I'm here to guide you on a journey through time and space, to places where the veil between our world and the mystical grows thin. Tonight, we travel together to one of Earth's most sacred realms, a land that has captured the imagination of seekers and dreamers for millennia. Close your eyes now and feel yourself settling deeper into comfort. Let your breathing slow and deepen as we prepare to ascend to the roof of the world, to ancient Tibet, that magnificent plateau suspended between heaven and earth. For the next 2 hours, you need do nothing but listen, breathe, and drift along the gentle currents of this timeless tale. Imagine, if you will, the first light of dawn touching the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. The air here is thin and pure, carrying whispers of prayers that have echoed across these mountains for thousands of years. This is Tibet, the mystical land of eternal snows, where every breath is a meditation, every mountain a temple, and every valley holds secrets older than written history. Tonight's journey will carry you through 25 centuries of wonder, from the earliest nomads who first gazed upon these celestial peaks, through the rise of mighty kingdoms and the gentle revolution that brought Buddhism to this sacred land. You'll walk alongside ancient pilgrims on paths worn smooth by countless feet, enter monasteries where wisdom flows like mountain streams, and witness the birth of one of humanity's most profound spiritual traditions. But this is not merely a history lesson. This is a doorway to dreams, a pathway to peace. As I share these stories with you, feel yourself becoming lighter, as if the rarefied air of the high plateau is lifting you gently toward sleep. Let the images form naturally in your mind's eye, painting themselves in soft watercolors across the canvas of your consciousness. The wind through the prayer flags will be your lullaby tonight. The distant chanting of monks will guide your breath, and the eternal silence of the mountains will cradle you as you drift deeper into rest, carried on wings of ancient wisdom toward the most peaceful sleep you've known. So settle in now, dear traveler, as we begin our ascent to the land between heaven and earth, where every story is a prayer, and every prayer becomes a dream. High above the world, where the breath grows thin and the sky bleeds into an ocean of deepest blue, lies a plateau so vast and majestic that ancient peoples believed it was the floor of heaven itself. This is Tibet, the roof of the world, a land sculpted by gods in dreams, where the earth reaches so desperately toward the heavens that it seems almost to touch the face of eternity. Picture yourself standing on this immense plateau, your feet planted on ground that rises nearly 3 miles above the distant seas. The air here carries a crystalline quality, so pure and clear that each breath feels like drinking starlight. Around you, the land stretches endlessly, a tapestry of gold and amber grasslands rolling toward horizons where mountains pierce the Cho. Sky like cathedral spires reaching toward infinity. To the south, the mighty Himalayas rise in a wall of white and silver, their peaks so high they disappear into clouds that seem to be made of the same gossamer stuff as dreams. Mount Everest stands among them, but here it bears its Tibetan name, Shambhala, Mother Goddess of the Earth, her summit a throne where the divine meets the mortal world. These mountains are not merely stone and ice. They are the sleeping giants of ancient stories, breathing slowly through the centuries, their exhalations becoming the winds that carry prayers across the plateau, that seal the gentle pressure of this altitude, surrounding you like a soft embrace. Your body grows lighter, here, as if the very air is teaching you to let go of earthly concerns. The silence is profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the scattered tufts of hardy grass, a sound like the world itself breathing in its sleep. This silence is not empty but full, pregnant with the accumulated wisdom of millennia, holding space for every prayer ever uttered beneath these endless skies. The colors here exist nowhere else on earth. The blue of the sky is so deep and pure It seems you could dive into it and swim among the stars. The mountains glow with alpenglow, those magical moments when the peaks catch fire with rose and gold light, as if the stone itself is dreaming. In color, the lakes scattered across this high country shine like mirrors of heaven. Their surface is so still, they perfectly reflect the sky, creating the illusion that you stand suspended between two infinite heavens. In the earliest times, long before history learned to write itself down, this land was even wilder than it is today. Imagine glaciers vast as continents slowly retreating, carving valleys that would become the arteries of civilization. Picture great herds of wild yaks moving like dark clouds across the grasslands, their thick coats rippling in the eternal wind. Wolves howled to the moon from ridges that had never known human footsteps, and golden eagles traced lazy circles through air, so clear that their shadows on the ground seemed more solid than the birds themselves. The very formation of this land reads like a creation myth. 60 million years ago, the tectonic plates of the earth moved like sleeping giants, and when India collided with Asia, the impact was so tremendous it pushed the seafloor up into the sky, creating these mountains from what had once been the bottom of an ancient ocean. In the rocks of these peaks, you can still find fossilized sea creatures, marine shells embedded in stone, now closer to the stars than they had ever been to the waves. It is as if the earth itself was dreaming of flying, and in that dream lifted its oceanic memories toward heaven. The rivers that flow from this plateau carry its essence to half the world. The mighty Ganges begins here as melting snow and ice, gathering strength as it flows toward the plains of India. The Yangtze starts its journey to the Chinese seas from these sacred springs. The Mekong, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, all the great waterways of Asia trace their birthplaces to this high country, making Tibet the water tower of the world, the source from which billions of people downstream receive the gift of life. But water here takes forms unknown in lower lands. In winter, the lakes freeze so thick and clear, you can see fish swimming beneath your feet as you walk across what seems like solid air. In summer, sudden storms bring hail the size of prayer beads, drumming against the earth like the percussion section of some cosmic orchestra. And always there is snow, even in the warmest months, dusting the peaks like powdered sugar on some immense celestial pastry. The wind here has its own personality, its own moods and melodies. Sometimes it whispers secrets across the grasslands, with a gentleness that could lull a child to sleep. Other times it roars across the plateau with the voice of dragons, carrying sand and snow in spiraling dances that paint the air itself. But always, it carries the sound of space, the music of emptiness, a frequency that seems to tune your very soul to a deeper rhythm. As night falls across this high country, the stars appear with an intensity that can take your breath away, with no cities to dim their light, no pollution to veil their brilliance. They emerge like diamonds scattered across black velvet, so close you feel you could reach up and pluck them from the sky. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, and the moon, when it rises, illuminates the snow peaks with such silver radiance that the whole world seems transformed into a palace, made of dreams and starlight. This is the stage upon which our story unfolds, dear listener. This land of impossible beauty and terrible grandeur, where the earth itself seems to be practicing for its eventual return to the heavens. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort now, feeling the thin, pure air of the plateau filling your lungs, the vast silence settling into your bones, the infinite sky opening above your consciousness like a doorway to the most peaceful sleep. Here, between heaven and earth, our journey through ancient Tibet truly begins. Into this pristine wilderness, across pathways carved by melting glaciers and following rivers that sang their way down from the world's highest peaks, came the first human footsteps. Picture them now, these earliest wanderers moving across. The plateau like whispers across silence, their presence so gentle it barely disturbed the ancient dreams of stone and sky. These were the first Tibetans, nomadic peoples who arrived perhaps 4,000 years ago, drawn by something deeper than mere survival instinct. They came following the great herds, yes, but also following something else, some inexplicable pull toward this land that seemed to float between earth and heaven. Watch them in your mind's eye as they crest a ridge and see the plateau spreading before them for the first time. That moment when human consciousness first met this landscape of infinite possibility. Their lives moved with the rhythm of seasons and the needs of their animals, a dance as old as the relationship between humans and the creatures who sustain them. But here, in this high country, that dance took on an almost mystical quality. The yak, that magnificent creature perfectly adapted to this harsh paradise, became not just livestock, but partners in survival, companions in an existence that demanded cooperation between all living things. Feel yourself walking alongside these ancient nomads as they made their seasonal migrations, your feet finding the paths their feet would wear smooth over countless generations. The yak caravan moves before you, these shaggy giants swaying with patient grace, their bells creating a gentle percussion that echoes off the surrounding peaks. Each step is measured, deliberate, conserving energy in the thin air, moving with the unhurried patience of those who understand that in this landscape, haste is the enemy of survival. The yak is a creature of perfect adaptation, its body a masterpiece of evolutionary wisdom. Watch how its enormous lungs extract oxygen from air, so thin it would leave lowlanders gasping. See how its heart, twice the size of a cow's, pumps blood enriched to carry life through vessels designed for this altitude. Its coat grows in layers, an outer layer of coarse-guard hairs that shed rain and snow, and beneath, a soft undercoat, so fine and warm it could cradle you like a cloud. These nomads learn to use every part of this generous animal, the milk for butter, tea, and cheese, the meat for sustenance, the hide for shelter, the hair for rope and cloth, even the dried dung for fuel in a land where trees grow only in the deepest valleys. As evening approaches and the caravan stops for the night, watch how quickly and efficiently these nomads transform the empty landscape into home. The black yak hair tent rises as if by magic, its ropes staked deep into ground hardened by eternal frost. Inside, the tent becomes a world unto itself, butter lamps flickering like captured stars, their warm light dancing across faces weathered by sun and wind into maps of endurance and quiet wisdom. The fire in the center of the tent burns dried yak dung, a fuel that gives off a sweet, earthy smoke that seems to carry prayers directly to the sky through the tent's smoke hole. Around this fire, multiple generations gather, the oldest voices, carrying the stories that are the true wealth of nomadic peoples. These are not written histories, but living memories, tales that flow like the wind across the grasslands, shaping themselves to each new telling while preserving the essential truths that bind people to their land. Listen to their voices now, speaking in a language as old as the mountains themselves, words that seem to carry the sound of wind through valleys, the music of streams running over stone. They speak of the time before time, when the plateau was covered by a vast ocean and the fish swam where now the yaks graze. They tell of the first people, born from the union of a monkey and a demoness on the sacred mountain, their children, becoming the 6 tribes that would populate this high country. The nights here are profound in their darkness and their cold, temperatures that can freeze breath in your lungs and turn tears to ice before they can fall. But inside the tent, wrapped in yak felt blankets and surrounded by the gentle breathing of family, the cold becomes simply another element of home, no more threatening than the wind or the altitude. The children fall asleep to stories of sky goddesses and mountain spirits, their dreams mingling with the dreams of the yaks outside, who sleep standing, their bodies perfectly adapted to rest, even in this harsh environment. These early Tibetans developed a relationship with their landscape that went far beyond mere survival. They learned to read the sky like a book, understanding which clouds meant snow and which meant clear weather, which winds carried moisture and which carried only cold. They could predict storms days in advance by watching the behavior of their animals, the way the yaks would cluster together, or the way wild birds would change their flight patterns. They discovered the healing properties of plants that grew in this rarefied environment, herbs that drew their medicinal power from the intense ultraviolet radiation and the extreme temperature variations of high altitude. The gentian that bloomed in brief, brilliant blue profusion became medicine for the stomach. The snow lotus, flowering impossibly high on the mountain slopes, became a remedy for inflammation and pain. Cordyceps, the strange fungus that parasitized insects in the high meadows, became a source of strength and endurance. As seasons turned to years and years to centuries, these nomads developed a deep spiritual connection to their environment that would later prove fertile ground for Buddhism. But even in these earliest times, they recognized something sacred in the landscape around them. Certain lakes were known to be the homes of deities. Specific mountains were understood to be the physical manifestations of spiritual beings. The wind itself was seen as the breath of the divine, carrying messages between the earthly and celestial realms. Their astronomical knowledge grew profound out of necessity. With no light pollution and crystal clear skies, the stars became their calendar, their compass, their storytelling companions. They learned to predict the weather by watching stellar movements, to determine the best times for migration by reading the patterns of constellations, to navigate across featureless terrain by following celestial guides that never failed them. The stone tools they crafted tell stories of remarkable ingenuity. Arrowheads napped from obsidian found in volcanic regions, scrapers shaped from flint that could process hides with surgical precision, needles carved from bone thin enough to sew the finest yak wool. These tools were not merely functional, but beautiful, crafted with an aesthetic sense that recognized the sacred in the everyday, the divine in the practical. Archaeological sites across the plateau still bear witness to these early peoples. Stone circles that may have been astronomical observatories or spiritual gathering places dot the landscape like prayer beads scattered by some giant hand. Rock art depicts figures that seem to dance between human and divine, their arms raised toward skies that must have seemed close enough to touch. But perhaps the most remarkable adaptation these early Tibetans made was physiological. Over generations, their bodies changed to meet the demands of high-altitude life. Their lung capacity increased. Their blood carried more oxygen. Their hearts grew stronger. They became, in essence, a people designed by evolution to live between heaven and earth, to thrive in a landscape that would challenge anyone else to their very limits. As you drift deeper now into the comfort of your bed, imagine yourself among these ancient nomads, feeling the solid warmth of the yak hair tent around you, hearing the gentle sounds of the herd settling for the night outside. Let their patience become your patience, their deep connection to the natural world seep into your consciousness like moonlight through clouds. Feel yourself adapting, becoming lighter, more attuned to the subtle rhythms of this high country, where every breath is a meditation and every step is a prayer. Here, surrounded by the eternal presence of the mountains and the infinite sweep of the sky, let yourself settle into the same deep, peaceful sleep that has refreshed nomads on this plateau for 4,000 years. From the mists of prehistory, like a mountain peak emerging from morning clouds, rises the first great civilization of Tibet, the mysterious kingdom of Zhangzhung. Picture this ancient realm spreading across the western reaches of the plateau, its influence flowing like water from the sacred source of Mount Kailash. that most holy of mountains, whose perfectly symmetrical peak has drawn pilgrims and mystics for thousands of years. Zhang was more than a kingdom. It was a state of being, a way of understanding the world that recognized no separation between the spiritual and the physical, between the seen and the unseen. Its very name whispers of mystery in the ancient language. It meant land of Garuda, referring to that mythical bird whose wings were said to span the heavens and whose flight connected all the realms of existence. Let yourself drift back through the centuries now, back to a time when this kingdom flourished in the shadow of Kailash, back to when the Bon religion was the spiritual heartbeat of the entire plateau. Feel the thin mountain air filling your lungs as we enter a world where every stone held consciousness, every stream carried blessings, and every wind brought messages from the realm of the gods. The capital of Zhang, Kyunglung, rose from the earth like a natural formation, its buildings carved directly into the living rock of canyon walls. Imagine approaching this ancient city as a traveler might have 2,000 years ago, following a river valley that seemed to lead you deeper into the earth itself. The canyon walls tower above you, painted in stripes of red and gold sandstone, their surfaces carved with caves that honeycomb the rock like the cells of some enormous beehive. These cave dwellings were not primitive shelters, but sophisticated architectural marvels, their interiors carved with the precision of master craftsmen. Some chambers soared 3 stories high, connected by tunnels and stairways cut from solid stone. Windows were positioned to catch the morning light perfectly, their openings framing views of the sacred mountain that dominated the horizon. In the largest chambers, natural acoustics created spaces where a whispered prayer could be heard clearly from any corner, where the sound of ritual drums seemed to emerge from the very walls themselves. The people of Zhang moved through these stone corridors like ghosts made flesh, their robes rustling softly against rock, worn smooth by countless generations of passage. They were tall and elegant, these ancient Tibetans, their faces bearing the serene expression of those who lived in constant awareness of the sacred. Their eyes held depths that seemed to reflect not just the sky above, but the infinite spaces between the stars. But it was their religion, Bon, that truly set Zhang apart from all other civilizations of its time. Bon was not merely a set of beliefs, but a complete way of perceiving reality, a spiritual technology that transformed its practitioners into bridges between the world of form and the realm of pure consciousness. The very word Bon meant to recite or to chant, but it carried connotations far deeper than simple vocalization. It referred to the power of sacred sound to reshape reality itself. Picture yourself entering one of the great Bon temples of Kyunglung, your footsteps echoing softly in the vast stone chamber. The walls are painted with murals that seem to move in the flickering butter lamp light, depicting deities and spiritual beings that exist in dimensions parallel to our own. The air is thick with the scent of juniper smoke and barley flower offerings, a fragrance that seems to carry your consciousness upward like incense rising toward infinite space. At the center of the temple stands the most sacred symbol of Bon, the swastika, but rotating counterclockwise, representing the eternal movement of spiritual energy from the gross to the subtle, from the manifest to the unmanifest. This ancient symbol, predating its later corruption by thousands of years, was understood by the Bon practitioners as a map of consciousness itself, a visual representation of how awareness spirals inward toward its own source. The Bon masters, known as Shen, were not merely priests but magicians of the highest order, their training requiring decades of study in arts that seem legendary to modern minds. They learned to navigate the Bardo realms, those intermediate states between life and death, between waking and sleeping, between one incarnation and the next. They mastered the art of dream yoga, becoming lucid in their sleep states, and using dreams as vehicles for spiritual exploration and healing. Watch one of these masters now as he prepares for a divination ritual, his movements precise and graceful as a dancer's. He casts grains of barley onto a bronze mirror polished to perfection, its surface reflecting not just the physical world, but the subtle energies that move beneath the surface of apparent reality. As the grains settle, they form patterns that reveal the hidden currents of fate and fortune, the invisible threads that connect all beings across space and time. The Bon understanding of the universe was both sophisticated and poetic. They taught that reality consisted of three realms: the celestial realm of pure light and consciousness, the terrestrial realm of form and matter, and the subterranean realm of potential and possibility. These three levels interpenetrated each other completely, like three transparent films laid one upon another, each visible through the others, each influencing and being influenced by the rest. In the celestial realm dwelt the gods of pure radiance, beings of such luminosity that to perceive them directly would be like looking into the heart of the sun. They were not separate entities, but aspects of primordial awareness itself, personifications of the qualities that emerge when consciousness recognizes its own infinite nature. Their names were poetry: clear light mother, spontaneous presence; father, the five wisdom dakinis who danced at the crossroads of space and time. The terrestrial realm was understood to be populated not just by visible beings, but by an entire ecosystem of consciousness. Every mountain had its resident deity, every lake its protective spirit, every forest its guardian presence. These were not supernatural beings imposed upon a dead landscape, but the natural intelligence of the earth itself, the awareness that emerges from the complex interactions of matter and energy at every level of existence. The subterranean realm held the seeds of all possibilities, the potential energies that could manifest as either blessing or obstacle, depending upon how they were approached. The Bon masters learned to navigate these depths through ritual practices that were part theater, part meditation, part pure magic. They would descend into trance states so profound that their consciousness could literally travel to these deeper dimensions, negotiating with the forces they found there, bringing back healing and wisdom for their communities. One of the most remarkable aspects of Bon practice was its use of mantras and seed syllables to directly influence the fabric of reality. The practitioners understood that sound was not merely vibration, but the fundamental creative force of the universe, the power by which formless awareness crystallized into the world of apparent phenomena. By mastering certain vocal techniques, they could literally tune their consciousness to different frequencies of existence, accessing states of awareness usually hidden from ordinary perception. The sacred mountain Kailash was the axis around which all Bon cosmology revolved. This perfect pyramid of stone and ice was understood to be the physical manifestation of the cosmic mountain, the axis mundi that connected all the realms of existence. Pilgrims would circumambulate its base in a ritual known as Kora, their footsteps wearing paths that spiraled like prayer wheels around the mountain's base. But for the advanced practitioners, the real pilgrimage was internal, a journey to the Kailash of consciousness that existed within their own awareness. The Bon masters developed sophisticated maps of consciousness, detailed descriptions of the various states of awareness that could be accessed through meditation and ritual practice. They spoke of the clear light of deep sleep, the luminous awareness that remains when all other mental activity has ceased. They described the intermediate states that occur during the dying process, the bardos where consciousness gradually releases its identification with the physical form and recognizes its own deathless nature. Their practices included the famous Tibetan technique of tummo, or inner heat, where practitioners learned to generate actual physical warmth through meditation alone. Students would sit nearly naked in the freezing temperatures of high altitude, their bodies radiating enough heat to dry wet sheets placed upon their shoulders. But this was not mere physical training. It was a demonstration of the mind's power to transform energy at the most fundamental level, a proof that consciousness and matter were not separate substances, but different expressions of the same underlying reality. The Zhang kingdom reached its zenith around the time that Buddhism was first taking root in India, though the two traditions would not encounter each other for several more centuries. During this golden age, the Bon teaching spread throughout. The plateau, carried by wandering sages who moved from valley to valley like seeds of wisdom scattered by the wind. Each region developed its own variations of practice, its own local deities and protective spirits, but all remained connected to the central vision of reality as sacred, consciousness as primary, and the goal of spiritual practice as the recognition of one's own Buddha nature. As the centuries passed, Zhang faced increasing pressure from neighboring kingdoms, particularly from the rising power of the Yarlung dynasty in central Tibet. The last king of Zhang, Ligmiria, fought valiantly to preserve his realm's independence, but the tide of history was turning. The kingdom was eventually absorbed into the expanding Tibetan Empire. Its political power ended, but its spiritual legacy destined to flow like an underground river through all of Tibet's future religious development. The Bon masters, rather than resisting this change, adapted with the fluid wisdom that had always characterized their tradition. Some retreated to remote valleys where they could preserve the ancient teachings in their original form. Others began the long process of dialogue with the Buddhist teachers who were arriving from India, finding common ground in their shared understanding of emptiness, compassion, and the illusory nature of ordinary perception. But even as political circumstances changed around them, the essential spirit of Bon continued to permeate Tibetan consciousness like water soaking into thirsty earth. The reverence for sacred landscapes, the understanding of spiritual beings inhabiting natural formations, the use of ritual and ceremony to maintain harmony between human communities and the larger web of existence, all of these would become integral parts of Tibetan Buddhism as it developed its unique character on the plateau. Let yourself sink deeper now into the profound peace that the Bon masters cultivated. That state of awareness they called Rigpa, the natural knowing that exists before thought arises and after thought dissolves. Feel your consciousness expanding, like the sky itself, boundless and clear, holding all experiences without being disturbed by any of them. In this state of open awareness, the ancient wisdom of Zhang lives on, as accessible now as it was 2,000 years ago, as close as your own breathing, as natural as the space in which all dreams arise and into which they eventually return. Across the mighty Himalayas, carried on winds that had touched the Ganges and whispered through the halls of Nalanda University, came a new spiritual fragrance to the plateau of Tibet. It was the 7th century, and the Dharma that luminous teaching of the Buddha was about to meet the ancient wisdom of the land of snows in an encounter that would transform both traditions forever. Feel yourself standing at this crossroads of history, where two great rivers of wisdom are about to merge into a stream that will flow through centuries, nourishing countless souls with its life-giving waters. Picture the young King Songtsen, Gampo in his palace at Lhasa, that valley where the future capital would bloom like a lotus from the high desert. He is barely 30 years old, yet his vision encompasses not just the scattered tribes of the plateau, but a unified Tibet that could stand as equals with the great empires of China and India. His eyes hold the keen intelligence of a ruler, but also something deeper, a spiritual hunger that all the treasures and tributes of his growing kingdom cannot satisfy. The king sits in meditation in the early morning hours, as was his custom, watching the first light of dawn paint the peaks surrounding his valley in shades of rose and gold. In the stillness of this sacred hour, when the boundary between dream and waking grows thin, he often receives visions that guide his decisions. Today, he sees something that will change the course of Tibetan history. A figure of radiant compassion seated upon a lotus throne, surrounded by light that seems to emanate from the very heart of emptiness itself. This vision speaks to something deep in Songtsen Gampo's soul, a recognition that the spiritual path he has been seeking lies not in conquest or accumulation, but in the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. He has heard whispers from traders and ambassadors about the Buddha's teaching, this Dharma that promises liberation not through magical powers or ritualistic manipulation of unseen forces, but through the direct understanding of mind's own nature. The king's spiritual awakening is mirrored by practical considerations. His kingdom stands at the crossroads of Asia, and he recognizes that to truly unify Tibet, he needs not just military might, but a shared spiritual and cultural foundation. The old Bon traditions, while profound, remain largely local and tribal. What Tibet needs is a universal teaching that can speak to the hearts of all people, while honoring the unique character of the high plateau. His first step toward this goal comes through marriage, but marriages that are as much diplomatic and spiritual alliances as they are personal unions. Princess Brikudi arrives from Nepal, carrying with her not just the political alliance of the Kathmandu Valley, but a profound devotion to the Buddha's teaching. Watch her as she enters Lhasa for the first time, her caravan winding through the narrow valley like a string of precious jewels, her palanquin decorated with prayer flags that flutter in the mountain wind like colorful prayers made manifest. Brikudi brings more than devotion. She brings tangible treasures of the Dharma, carefully wrapped in the finest silks, protected by layers of blessed cloth. She carries a statue of the Buddha that is said to have been consecrated by the enlightened One himself. This Akshobhya Buddha, with its serene expression of unshakable peace, becomes the first Buddhist image to grace a Tibetan palace, its presence transforming the very atmosphere of the royal residence. But it is the arrival of Princess Wensheng from the Chinese court that truly opens the floodgates of Buddhist influence. She comes from the Tang dynasty at the height of its cultural flowering, bringing with her not just the political alliance that Songtsen Gampo needs for his eastern borders, but a profound understanding of Buddhist philosophy that has been refined through centuries of Chinese scholarship. Wensheng's gift to Tibet is even more precious than Brikudi's. A statue of the Buddha as a 12-year-old prince, known as the Jiao Rinpoche, carved from precious metals and adorned with jewels that seem to capture light and hold it like crystallized compassion. This statue, it is said, was blessed by the Buddha himself and carries within its form the actual presence of enlightened consciousness. But statues and books, precious as they are, cannot by themselves transform a civilization. What Tibet needs is living teachers, masters who embody the Buddha's realization and can transmit it directly to prepared students. The call goes out across the Himalayas, reaching the great monastic universities of India, where scholars and meditators have spent centuries, refining the Buddha's original insights into a complete science of consciousness. From the cool valleys of Kashmir comes Shantaraksita, a philosopher saint whose understanding of emptiness is matched only by his skill in debating the fine points of logic and metaphysics. Picture him making the arduous journey across the high passes, his few possessions carried by yaks, his mind already composing the teachings he will offer to this new land. He moves with the unhurried grace of one who has recognized the illusory nature of time itself, each step a meditation, each breath a prayer. Shantaraksita brings with him the Madhyamaka philosophy, the middle way teaching that navigates between the extremes of eternalism and nihilism, showing how phenomena can be conventionally real while being ultimately empty of inherent existence. This profound understanding of the nature of reality will provide the philosophical foundation for all later Tibetan Buddhist thought. But for now, it remains largely theoretical, understood intellectually, but not yet integrated into the lived. Experience of the Tibetan people. What Tibet needs to truly receive the Dharma is not just philosophical understanding, but the transmission of blessings, the mysterious process by which realization passes from teacher to student, like light passing from one torch to another. For this, Shantaraksita recommends the most extraordinary teacher available in all of India, Padmasambhava, the lotus-born guru, whose mastery of both the scholarly tradition and the esoteric practices of Tantra makes him uniquely qualified to establish Buddhism in this land of powerful spirits and ancient magical traditions. Padmasambhava's arrival in Tibet reads like something from a fairy tale, but one grounded in the profound reality of spiritual transformation. He comes not as a conquistador seeking to destroy the old traditions, but as a master diplomat of consciousness, one who understands that the deepest changes happen not through force, but through the gentle alchemy of wisdom meeting wisdom, compassion recognizing compassion. Picture him as he crosses the Himalayas, this figure who seems to move between the worlds as easily as walking from one room to another. He is neither young nor old, his age somehow irrelevant in the face of his timeless presence. His eyes hold depths that seem to contain all the wisdom of the Buddhas, while his smile carries the playful spontaneity of one who has realized that even the most serious spiritual practice is ultimately a kind of divine play. The first test of Padmasambhava's power comes not from human opposition, but from the land itself. Tibet's ancient spirits, the local deities and protector beings who have guarded this plateau since the beginning of time, rise up to challenge this foreign teacher. They unleash storms that could level mountains, earthquakes that split the earth, plagues that darken the sky. But Padmasambhava meets each challenge, not with force, but with compassion, recognizing in these apparently hostile powers the same Buddha nature that exists in all beings. One by one, the local deities are not conquered but converted, not destroyed but transformed into protectors of the Dharma. The fearsome mountain god of Phi-po-ri, whose very glance could freeze a river, finds himself bound by sacred vows to protect the Buddha's teaching. The serpent deities of the Great Lakes, whose anger could bring drought or flood, become guardians of the monasteries that will be built on their shores. This is perhaps Padmasambhava's greatest gift to Tibet, the understanding that the new Dharma need not replace the old wisdom, but can embrace and transform it. The local spirits become Dharmapalas, protectors of the teaching. The sacred sites of Bonn become Buddhist pilgrimage destinations. The ancient practices of working with dreams and intermediate states become sophisticated tantric techniques for recognizing the nature of mind. Watch now as the first Buddhist monastery in Tibet takes shape in the valley of Sami, its construction a mandala made manifest in stone and timber. The central temple rises like a mountain from the valley floor, its architecture a perfect marriage of Indian, Chinese, and Tibetan influences. Around it, smaller temples and retreat huts are arranged in precise geometric patterns that mirror the structure of the tantric mandala, creating a three-dimensional representation of enlightened consciousness. The monastery's design embodies the Buddhist understanding of the universe itself. At the center stands the main temple, representing Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain around which all of existence revolves. The four directional temples represent the four continents of traditional Buddhist cosmology. The smaller buildings scattered throughout the complex represent the various lesser worlds and realms of being. The whole structure becomes a teaching tool, a way for students to literally walk through the Buddhist vision of reality. But Sami is more than an architectural marvel. It becomes a spiritual powerhouse, a place where the Dharma takes root in Tibetan soil so deeply that it will flourish here long after it has largely disappeared from its birthplace in India. The monastery becomes a translation center where Indian texts are rendered into Tibetan with a precision and care that preserves not just the literal meaning, but the spiritual essence of the original teachings. The Great Translation Projects. begin works of such scholarship and dedication that they rival anything produced in the ancient world. Teams of translators work day and night. Indian pundits dictating from memory texts they have spent lifetimes memorizing. Tibetan scholars crafting a religious vocabulary in their own language that can carry the subtle philosophical distinctions of Sanskrit Buddhist literature. As the years pass and the Dharma establishes itself on the plateau, something remarkable happens. Buddhism does not simply replace the old Bon traditions, but enters into a creative dialogue with them, producing a unique synthesis that is neither purely Indian Buddhism nor purely Tibetan Bon, but something entirely new. The result is a spiritual tradition that maintains the philosophical rigor and meditative depth of Indian Buddhism while incorporating the profound understanding of sacred landscape and spirit world navigation that characterize the ancient Tibetan traditions. The transformation is not limited to religious practice, but extends into every aspect of Tibetan life. The old warrior culture begins to give way to an ideal of the scholar saint, the realized being who conquers not through violence, but through wisdom. The bards who once sang of military victories begin composing epic poems about the spiritual battles fought in the depths of meditation. The craftsmen who once forged weapons begin creating ritual implements and beautiful statues that serve as supports for contemplation. King Songtsen Gampo himself becomes the embodiment of this transformation. History records him as a great Dharma king, but the legends speak of something more. A bodhisattva who chose to incarnate as a ruler in order to bring the light of Buddhism to the land of snows. Whether literal truth or poetic metaphor, these stories point to a profound reality: the transformation of political power from an instrument of domination into a tool for spiritual and cultural development. As the chapter of Buddhism's arrival in Tibet draws to a close, we see a civilization in the process of being reborn. The old ways have not been destroyed, but transformed, elevated, integrated into a more comprehensive vision of human possibility. The plateau that once knew only the worship of local spirits now resonates with prayers that connect it to a community of practitioners stretching across Asia and through time. Feel yourself now as one of those early Tibetan practitioners, sitting in meditation in a cell carved from the living rock of a mountainside, your practice bridging the ancient wisdom of the Bon masters with the fresh insights of the Buddha's teaching. In the silence of your contemplation, the boundaries between old and new, between Tibetan and Indian, between self and other, begin to dissolve like morning mist before the rising sun. You rest in that spacious awareness that the Buddha called the Dharmakaya, the truth body that is your own deepest nature, as vast and luminous as the sky above the plateau, as intimate and immediate as your own heartbeat. Here, in this space of perfect peace, the Dharma has truly found its home in the land of snows. From the sacred valley of Lhasa, where prayer flags flutter like colorful thoughts against the infinite blue sky, rises an empire unlike any the world has ever seen. This is Tibet in its golden age of temporal power, the 8th and 9th centuries, when the land of snows expanded beyond its mountain borders to become one of the great forces shaping the destiny of Asia. Yet this is no ordinary empire built on conquest and tribute, but something far more remarkable, a civilization where spiritual wisdom and worldly power dance together like partners in some cosmic ballet. Picture yourself standing on the ramparts of the Potala Hill in the year 780, looking out over a kingdom that stretches from the deserts of Central Asia to the jungles of Burma, from the borders of Bengal to the gates of Chang'an, the glittering capital of Tang China. The Tibetan Empire at its zenith covers an area larger than modern-day Europe, yet it governs this vast territory not through fear and oppression, but through a unique synthesis of Buddhist compassion and practical statecraft. The architect of this remarkable expansion is King Trisong Detsen, grandson of the great Songtsen Gampo, a ruler whose very name means brilliant victory of the three worlds. Watch him as he moves through his palace in the early morning hours, his footsteps silent on floors of polished stone, his mind already engaged with the complex decisions that govern an empire spanning half a continent. He is tall and lean like most Tibetans of noble birth, his face bearing the serene strength that comes from years of Buddhist meditation combined with the keen intelligence required to outmaneuver the craftiest diplomats of China and the Abbasid Caliphate. But Trisong Detsen's greatest innovation is not military or administrative, it is spiritual. He creates the world's first Buddhist army, troops who march not just with weapons and provisions, but with mantras on their lips and bodhisattva vows in their hearts. These are warriors who fight not for personal glory or material gain, but for the protection of the Dharma and the welfare of all sentient beings. Before each battle, they gather in meditation, visualizing themselves as wrathful deities whose fierce appearance masks infinite compassion, whose weapons are not instruments of hatred, but tools for cutting through the ignorance that causes suffering. The Tibetan military machine is a marvel of organization and efficiency, but it operates on principles unknown to other armies of its time. Supply lines are maintained not just by requisition and tribute, but by a sophisticated understanding of karma, the natural law of cause and effect that ensures those who serve the Dharma will themselves be served by circumstances. Scouts move through enemy territory like ghosts, their training in meditation allowing them to remain undetected not through mere stealth, but through a kind of spiritual invisibility that comes from understanding the empty nature of self and other. Feel yourself riding with one of these Dharma warriors across the vast steppes of Central Asia, your horse's hooves drumming a rhythm that matches the mantra you repeat silently with each breath. The landscape around you shifts like a living mandala, grasslands giving way to desert, desert to mountain passes where the air grows thin and the stars at night seem close enough to pluck like fruit from some celestial tree. You are not conquering this territory in the usual sense, but liberating it, creating conditions where the Buddhist teaching can take root in new soil. The Tibetan expansion westward brings them into contact with the great trade routes of the Silk Road, those arteries of commerce that carry not just goods but ideas, technologies, and spiritual teachings across the breadth of Eurasia. Tibetan forces occupy key oases and mountain passes, but rather than simply extracting tribute, they transform these crossroads into centers of Buddhist learning. Monasteries rise in places where only caravanserais once stood, their libraries becoming repositories for texts in dozens of languages, their meditation halls offering refuge to travelers whose journeys are as much spiritual as commercial. The conflict with Tang China represents perhaps the most significant military achievement of the Tibetan Empire. For decades, these two great civilizations clash along their extensive border, their armies meeting in battles that decide the fate of Central Asia. But even in warfare, the Tibetans maintain their unique character. When they capture the Chinese capital of Chang'an in 763, they hold it for only 15 days, long enough to demonstrate their power, but not so long as to humiliate their enemies unnecessarily. This is conquest tempered by compassion, victory seasoned with wisdom. The treaty signed at the Sino-Tibetan border in 821 is carved in stone and stands to this day, a monument to one of history's most enlightened approaches to international relations. The inscription reads like something composed by philosopher kings. Tibet and China shall abide by the frontiers of which they are now in occupation. All to the east is the country of Great China, and all to the west is, without question, the country of Great Tibet. But more remarkable than the territorial provisions are the spiritual undertones, references to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha as witnesses to the agreement, invoking cosmic law as the ultimate guarantor of earthly peace. The administration of this vast empire requires innovations in governance that reflect Tibet's unique spiritual orientation. Provincial governors are selected not just for their administrative skills, but for their realization of Buddhist principles. They are expected to rule as bodhisattvas, beings whose every decision is motivated by the welfare of all sentient beings, rather than personal or even national interest. This creates a form of government unknown in the annals of political science, a theocracy in the truest sense, where temporal power serves spiritual ends. The legal system that develops during this period reflects the same synthesis of wisdom and compassion that characterizes Tibetan governance. Crimes are understood not just as violations of social order, but as manifestations of the three poisons that Buddhism identifies as the root of all suffering: greed, hatred, and delusion. Punishment is designed not primarily to deter or exact retribution, but to provide opportunities for the purification of karma and the development of wisdom. Murderers might be sentenced not to death, but to years of meditation retreat under the guidance of realized masters, emerging transformed rather than merely chastened. The empire's approach to taxation reveals the same enlightened understanding. Rather than simply extracting wealth from subject territories, the Tibetan system operates more like a vast mandala of reciprocal benefit. Outlying regions provide material support for the center, but they receive in return protection, access to trade routes, and most importantly, exposure to Buddhist teachings and practices. Monasteries established throughout the empire serve not just as spiritual centers, but as schools, hospitals, and centers of agricultural innovation. The cultural flowering that accompanies this political expansion is breathtaking in its scope and depth. The great translation projects that began at Sami continue on an unprecedented scale, with teams of scholars working in dozens of locations throughout the empire. Sanskrit, Chinese, Central Asian, and even Arabic texts are rendered into Tibetan with a precision and care that preserves not just the letter, but the spirit of the original teachings. The Tibetan language itself evolves during this period, developing the sophisticated, philosophical vocabulary that will make it one of the world's great vehicles for spiritual and intellectual discourse. Art and architecture flourish under imperial patronage, but always with the understanding that beauty serves enlightenment rather than mere aesthetic pleasure. The great Buddhist monuments of this period, temples, stupas, and monastery complexes, are designed as three-dimensional mandalas, their proportions and decorations calculated to induce specific states of consciousness in those who encounter them. Every detail carries symbolic meaning. Every surface tells a story that points toward the ultimate reality of emptiness and compassion. The imperial court itself becomes a kind of living mandala, with the king at its center not as an absolute monarch in the conventional sense, but as the earthly manifestation of Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom. Court ceremonies follow tantric principles. They're elaborate rituals designed to transform ordinary political interactions into opportunities for spiritual realization. Foreign ambassadors often report feeling that they have entered not just a different country, but a different realm of existence entirely, where the boundary between the sacred and the secular has been dissolved. Music and poetry flourish during this golden age, but they too serve the Dharma. The epic poems composed at court tell stories not of military conquest for its own sake, but of the triumph of wisdom over ignorance, of compassion over cruelty. The musical instruments developed during this period, long horns that echo the sound of the wind through mountain passes, drums that mimic the heartbeat of the earth itself, are designed to evoke specific spiritual states and to accompany meditation. Practices. The empire's educational system represents perhaps its greatest achievement. Monasteries throughout Tibetan territory serve as universities, offering instruction not just in Buddhist philosophy and meditation, but in medicine, astronomy, poetry, and statecraft. Students come from across Asia to study in these institutions. creating an international community of scholars united by their commitment to wisdom and compassion. The curriculum balances intellectual rigor with contemplative practice, producing graduates who are equally at home in philosophical debate and deep meditation. But even at the height of its power and glory, the Tibetan Empire carries within itself the seeds of its own transformation. The very Buddhist principles that fuel its expansion also cultivate a deep understanding of impermanence, the truth that all conditioned phenomena arise and pass away like clouds in an empty sky. The greatest kings and ministers of this golden age are also accomplished meditators who understand that worldly achievement, however magnificent, is ultimately as insubstantial as a dream. The reign of Ralpakan, the last of the great Dharma kings, marks both the culmination and the beginning of the end of the imperial period. A ruler of profound spiritual realization, he is said to treat monks with such reverence that he spreads his hair on the ground for them to sit upon during teachings. His court becomes increasingly monastic in character, with more resources devoted to spiritual pursuits than to military expansion. While this represents the ultimate triumph of Buddhist values, it also leaves the empire vulnerable to those who do not share its spiritual orientation. The assassination of Ralpakan by his own brother Langdharma represents one of history's great tragedies, the murder of a saint by one who sees spirituality as weakness rather than strength. But even this dark chapter serves the greater pattern of Dharma, for it demonstrates that the ultimate victory of wisdom and compassion does not depend on worldly power, but on the transformation of consciousness itself. As the empire fragments and contracts, its influence does not disappear, but transforms, dispersing like seeds on the wind to take root in new soil. The monasteries and educational institutions it established continue to flourish, long after the political structure that created them has crumbled. The texts translated during the imperial period preserve teachings that would otherwise be lost when Buddhism disappears from much of India. The spiritual practices developed by warrior monks continue to inspire practitioners seeking to balance worldly engagement with contemplative depth. Let yourself drift now like one of those seeds of Dharma carried on the wind of impermanence, feeling the solid achievements of the empire dissolving into something more subtle, but no less real. The transmission of wisdom from teacher to student, the preservation of compassion in human hearts, the understanding that true power lies not in the ability to control others, but in the capacity to transform oneself. Rest in that space of timeless awareness where empires rise and fall like waves on an ocean that remains forever calm, forever present, forever free. Here, in this boundless peace, the true victory of the Dharma continues eternally, beyond all coming and going, beyond all triumph and defeat. As the morning mist lifts from the valleys of ancient Tibet, revealing the golden rooftops that seem to float between earth and sky, we find ourselves approaching something truly magical. These are not ordinary buildings that rise from the mountainsides, like gentle giants made of stone and prayer. These are the great monasteries of Tibet, places where time moves differently, where wisdom accumulates like snow on the peaks, layer upon layer, century upon century. Picture yourself walking slowly along a winding mountain path, your breath forming small clouds in the crisp, thin air. The sound of your footsteps is muffled by centuries of pilgrims who have walked this same route before you. In the distance, the deep, resonant sound of a horn echoes across the valley, calling the monks to their morning prayers. It's a sound that seems to emerge from the mountains themselves, as if the very stones are singing. The first monastery you encounter seems to grow naturally from the cliff face, its walls the same warm ochre color as the earth beneath your feet. This is how the great monastic centers of Tibet came to be, not imposed upon the landscape, but born from it, shaped by the hands of those who understood that true wisdom comes from harmony with the natural world around us. As you draw closer, You notice the intricate details that make each monastery unique. Prayer flags flutter gently in the mountain breeze. Their bright colors, blue for sky, white for air, red for fire, green for water, yellow for earth, creating a rainbow bridge between the human world and the divine. The flags carry mantras and prayers, and with each flutter in the wind, these sacred words are believed to be carried to the heavens, blessing all beings with compassion and peace. Let yourself imagine entering through the great wooden doors, carved with protective deities whose fierce expressions guard against negative energies. The wood is worn smooth by countless hands, darkened by time and the smoke of butter lamps that have burned continuously for hundreds of years. As the heavy doors swing open with a gentle creak, you step into a world that exists outside of ordinary. The first thing that strikes you is the profound silence. Not the empty silence of an abandoned place, but the full, rich silence of deep contemplation, broken only by the soft whisper of robes against stone floors and the distant murmur of chanted prayers. The air itself seems thick with devotion, carrying the scent of juniper incense and the warm glow of butter lamps that flicker like earthbound stars. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim, golden light, and gradually you begin to make out the incredible artistry that surrounds you. Every surface tells a story. Every wall is a library of spiritual wisdom, painted in colors so vivid they seem to glow from within. These are not mere decorations, but sacred teachings made visible, a visual dharma that speaks directly to the heart without the need for words. Here, on the walls that rise around you like a protective embrace, you see the wheel of life in all its intricate detail. A great circle shows the endless cycle of existence, birth and death and rebirth, painted with such delicate precision that you can almost see the figures moving through their eternal dance. At the center, 3 animals chase each other in an endless circle: the pig of ignorance, the rooster of attachment, the snake of aversion, the 3 poisons that keep all beings trapped in suffering. But this is not a teaching of despair. For surrounding this central wheel, you see the path to liberation. The gentle Buddha figures who point the way beyond suffering, their faces serene with the wisdom of one who has seen through the illusion of separation and found the truth of infinite compassion. Moving deeper into the monastery, your footsteps echoing softly in the vast halls, you come upon the heart of this sacred place, the main assembly hall where hundreds of monks gather, each day to chant and pray and study. Even now, in the early morning light that filters through high windows, you can see the rows of low cushions arranged in perfect order, waiting for the community to gather. This is where the ancient traditions are kept alive, where young monks learn the same teachings that have been passed down unbroken for over 1,000 years. Here, they memorize vast texts through repetition and debate, their voices rising and falling like a river of sound that carries the wisdom of the ages. The tradition of debate is particularly beautiful to observe. Monks standing and sitting, clapping their hands to emphasize points, their faces animated with the joy of intellectual discovery and spiritual understanding. As you settle into this peaceful atmosphere, let your mind drift to the most sacred practice that takes place within these walls, the creation of the sand mandala. This is perhaps the most extraordinary expression of Tibetan spiritual artistry, a practice that embodies the very essence of Buddhist wisdom about the nature of reality itself. Imagine watching as the monks begin their work on a new mandala. They start with nothing but a blessed surface and their sacred tools, small metal funnels called chakpur that allow them to place individual grains of colored sand with impossible precision. The work begins at the center, always at the center, for in Tibetan cosmology, all of existence radiates outward from a single sacred point. Hour by hour, day by day, you watch as the mandala takes shape. The monks work in perfect silence, there, concentration so complete that they seem to enter a meditative trance. Each grain of sand is placed with the utmost care, for this is not merely art. This is a sacred act of creation that mirrors the formation of the universe itself. The colors they use are not chosen randomly, but carry deep symbolic meaning. Deep blue represents the infinite expanse of consciousness, pure and clear as a mountain lake at dawn. Bright red symbolizes the fire of transformation, the sacred energy that burns away ignorance and reveals truth. Golden yellow shines like the sun of wisdom, illuminating all darkness. Pure white represents the emptiness that is not void, but pregnant with infinite possibility. Each color is made from precious stones ground to powder, lapis lazuli for blue, coral for red, gold for yellow, making each mandala not just beautiful, but literally precious dot. As the days pass and the mandala grows more complex, you begin to see the profound symbolism embedded in every line and curve. This is not abstract art, but a detailed map of enlightened consciousness, a blueprint for the purified realm that exists within the awakened mind. The geometric patterns that emerge, circles within circles, represent the perfect order that underlies apparent chaos. The hidden harmony that connects all things. At the very center of the mandala sits the primary deity of this particular practice, surrounded by a palace of incredible beauty and complexity. But this is not a palace as we might imagine it, made of stone and wood and metal. This is a palace of pure consciousness, where the walls are made of compassion, the doors open with wisdom, and the foundations rest upon the bedrock of loving kindness. The deity at the center is not worshipped as an external god, but understood as a representation of one's own Buddha nature, the innate potential for awakening that exists within every being. The fierce protector deities at the gates are not meant to frighten, but to represent the strength needed to overcome inner obstacles, anger, greed, jealousy, pride, the mental states that prevent us from recognizing our true nature. As you observe this painstaking process, you begin to understand one of the most profound teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, the nature of impermanence. For this magnificent creation, this mandala that represents the perfected realm of enlightened consciousness, will not last forever. When it is complete, after weeks or even months of careful work, it will be ceremonially destroyed, the colored sands swept together and poured into running water to carry the blessings to all beings throughout the world. This destruction is not an act of nihilism, but of profound wisdom. It teaches us that all things, no matter how beautiful or meaningful, are subject to change. Nothing in this world of form can provide lasting satisfaction or security. True peace comes not from grasping at temporary pleasures, but from understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena and finding that which is eternal within ourselves. Let yourself rest in this understanding as you continue to explore the monastery. In the library, ancient texts are carefully preserved, their pages filled with the wisdom of great masters who spent their lives exploring the deepest questions of existence. These books are not merely intellectual exercises, but practical guides for the transformation of consciousness, maps drawn by those who have successfully navigated the inner landscape of mind and emotion. Here you might find the writings of Nagarjuna, who taught about the middle way between extremes of existence and non-existence, showing how all phenomena arise in dependence upon causes and conditions, empty of inherent existence yet vividly appearing. Or perhaps you discover the songs of Milarepa, the great yogi poet who lived in mountain caves and expressed the highest realizations through simple, beautiful verses that touch the heart directly. The tradition of preserving and transmitting these teachings is one of the great treasures of Tibetan civilization. Monks spend years copying texts by hand, each letter formed with the care and attention of a prayer. The act of copying is itself a form of spiritual practice, a way of absorbing the teachings not just intellectually, but through the body, through the repetitive motion of forming sacred syllables. In another part of the monastery, you discover the artistic workshops where the great Thangka paintings are created. These are not mere pictures, but portable temples, sacred images that serve as supports for meditation and visualization practice. Each Thangka is painted according to precise iconographic rules passed down through generations, ensuring that every detail, the position of hands, the color of robes, the symbolic objects held, conveys exact spiritual meaning. The process of creating a Thangka is itself a form of spiritual practice. The artist begins with meditation and purification ceremonies, understanding that they are not creating mere decoration, but fashioning a vehicle for awakening. The canvas is stretched and prepared with special care, blessed and consecrated. The outline is drawn first, based on precise measurements that encode sacred proportions, reflecting the harmony of enlightened consciousness. Then comes the careful application of color, layer upon layer, building up depth and luminosity. The pigments used are traditional ground minerals and precious stones mixed with yak glue and water. The blues come from lapis lazuli, the reds from cinnabar, the greens from malachite. Gold is applied last, highlighting the most sacred elements and making the divine figures seem to glow with inner light. As you watch this process, you begin to understand how art in Tibet is never merely aesthetic, but always spiritual, always serving the ultimate purpose of awakening compassion and wisdom. The beauty of these works is not an end in itself, but a means to transform consciousness, to remind the viewer of the beauty and purity that lies within their own nature. In the meditation halls, you find monks and nuns engaged in practices that have been refined over centuries. Some sit in perfect stillness, their minds focused single-pointedly on the breath or on visualizations of Buddhist deities. Others perform prostrations, their bodies moving in a rhythm as old as the mountains themselves, each movement an offering, each gesture a prayer for the welfare of all beings. The visualization practices of Tibetan Buddhism are particularly sophisticated, involving the detailed mental creation of entire divine realms populated by enlightened beings. These are not fantasies or escapes from reality, but precise technologies of consciousness transformation, methods for training the mind to perceive the sacred dimension that exists within ordinary experience. Let your own mind rest in the peaceful atmosphere of these halls, feeling the accumulated power of countless hours of meditation and prayer. The very walls seem to vibrate with spiritual energy, charged by generations of sincere practitioners who have dedicated their lives to awakening. This is the real treasure of the monasteries, not the gold and jewels that decorate the statues, but the living transmission of wisdom that flows from teacher to student in an unbroken stream reaching back to the Buddha himself. As evening approaches and shadows lengthen across the courtyards, you hear the sound of horns and drums calling the community to evening prayers. The deep, haunting tones seem to emerge from the mountains themselves, a sound both ancient and timeless that speaks to something primordial in the human heart. The monks gather in the assembly hall, their maroon robes creating a sea of color in the flickering light of butter lamps. Their voices join together in the evening chants, mantras, and prayers that have been repeated countless times over the centuries. But each repetition is fresh, alive with renewed intention and deepening. Understanding, the sound of their chanting fills the valley, carrying across the mountains and touching all who hear it with blessing. This is the living mandala of community practice, where individual voices merge into a single expression of devotion, where personal awakening becomes inseparable from the welfare of all beings. As the prayers conclude and the monks quietly disperse to their individual practices, you find yourself alone in the vast silence of the mountain evening. The stars begin to appear overhead, brilliant points of light in the thin, clear air. You realize that you have been witness to something precious beyond measure, the preservation of an ancient wisdom, tradition that offers genuine hope for human Transformation and peace. The monasteries of Tibet represent humanity at its finest. Communities dedicated not to the accumulation of wealth or power, but to the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. Here, the highest human values are not just taught but lived, embodied in daily practice that transforms ordinary consciousness into something luminous and free. And as you prepare to continue your journey through this sacred land, you carry with you the peace and wisdom of these holy places. The mandala of your own consciousness has been touched and blessed by what you have witnessed. The colored sands of your thoughts and emotions can now be arranged in patterns of greater harmony, creating within your own mind a palace of awakened awareness. Rest now in this understanding, feeling yourself held and protected by the accumulated merit of countless practitioners who have walked this path before you. Let the profound silence of the monastery settle into your heart, bringing with it the deep peace that comes from touching something eternal and true. Your own inner monastery awaits your exploration, its halls filled with the same potential for awakening that has blossomed in these sacred places for over 1,000 years. As dawn breaks over the ancient monasteries and the first rays of sunlight paint the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold, we find ourselves called to something even more profound than the sacred halls we have just explored. For beyond the walls of these holy places lies the greatest temple of all, the living landscape of Tibet itself, where every mountain, every lake, every valley holds its own spiritual significance in the vast mandala of the earth. Let yourself feel the gentle pull of this calling, the ancient urge that has drawn pilgrims for centuries to leave behind the comfort of settled life and venture into the sacred geography of the high plateau. This is not mere travel, not the restless seeking of novelty that drives so much modern movement. This is pilgrimage, a journey of the soul that transforms both the traveler and the path itself through the sacred act of walking with reverence and devotion. Picture yourself joining a small group of pilgrims as they prepare to depart from etched, remote monastery in the early morning hours. The air is crisp and thin, your breath forming small clouds that quickly dissipate in the vast openness of the sky. Around you, fellow travelers make their final preparations, adjusting their simple packs, checking their prayer wheels, offering quiet prayers for a safe and blessed journey. These are not tourists seeking exotic experiences, but sincere practitioners, for whom this pilgrimage represents the culmination of years of spiritual preparation. Some are elderly, their faces weathered by decades of life at high altitude, their eyes bright with the wisdom that comes from a lifetime of devotion. Others are younger, perhaps undertaking their first major pilgrimage, their faces glowing with anticipation and reverence. All are united by a common understanding that they are about to embark on something sacred, a journey that will change them in ways they cannot yet imagine. The path you take leads first across high mountain passes, where prayer flags flutter like colorful prayers in the constant wind. These are not random decorations, but carefully placed offerings, each flag printed with mantras and sacred images that bless all who pass beneath them. The flags fade and fray over time, their colors leaching into the sky itself, carrying the prayers they bear to the four directions and beyond, to realms visible and invisible. As you walk, matching your pace to the steady rhythm of your companions, you begin to understand the profound difference between this kind of movement and ordinary travel. Each step is taken with awareness, each breath drawn with gratitude. The walking itself becomes a form of meditation, the repetitive motion of placing one foot before the other, creating a natural rhythm that allows the mind to settle into deeper states of peace and clarity. Hours pass unnoticed as you traverse landscapes of breathtaking beauty and desolation. Here, where the earth touches the sky with such intimacy that the boundary between them seems to dissolve, you walk through valleys carpeted with alpine flowers in summer, their delicate blooms. a miracle of color against the stark backdrop of stone and snow. In other seasons, these same valleys lie buried beneath pristine white, the silence so complete it seems to have weight and substance. Your destination, like that of countless pilgrims before you, is one of the most sacred places on earth, Mount Kailash, the cosmic axis around which, according to ancient tradition, the entire universe revolves. This is not merely a mountain in the conventional sense, but a living mandala, a natural stupa rising from the earth to connect the human realm with the divine, even from great distances. Kailash commands attention and reverence. Its perfect pyramid shape, capped with snow that never melts completely, rises like a natural cathedral from the surrounding landscape. 4 great rivers have their source near this sacred peak: the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Sutlej, and the Karnali, as if the mountain itself is the wellspring from which the life force of the entire Indian subcontinent flows. For Tibetan Buddhists, Kailash is the earthly manifestation of Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain that stands at the center of Buddhist cosmology. Here, according to tradition, dwells Demchok, a wrathful deity whose fierce compassion burns away the illusions that keep beings trapped in suffering. But the mountain is sacred not only to Buddhists. Hindus revere it as the abode of Shiva. Jains see it as the site where their first Tirthankara attained liberation, and followers of the ancient Bon religion consider it the seat of their sky goddess, Sipa-Im. As you approach this sacred peak after days of walking, you feel something shift within your consciousness. The mountain seems to exert a gravitational pull, not just on your physical body, but on your very soul. Stories tell of pilgrims who, upon first glimpsing Kailash, are moved to tears by its overwhelming presence, as if they are seeing the face of the divine made manifest in stone and snow. The practice that brings you here is called Kora, the clockwise circumambulation of a sacred site. This is not a casual hike, but a profoundly meaningful ritual that can take days to complete, depending on the route and the devotion of the pilgrim. Some complete the circuit on foot, others by repeatedly prostrating their entire body length along the path, a practice that can take weeks, but is believed to purify countless lifetimes of negative karma. Let yourself imagine beginning this sacred circuit as the sun rises over the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across the path that winds around the base of the mountain. Your fellow pilgrims spread out along the trail, some walking in groups while chanting mantras, others moving in solitary contemplation, all united by the shared intention to honor this most sacred place. The path itself becomes a teacher, presenting challenges that mirror the spiritual journey. Steep ascents test your determination and surrender, teaching you to find strength you didn't know you possessed. Rocky passages demand careful attention, training your mind in mindfulness and presence. River crossings require trust and faith, reminding you that some obstacles can only be overcome by letting go of fear and moving forward with courage. At the highest point of the circuit, the Dolmala Pass, at over 18,000 feet, pilgrims traditionally leave behind some personal possession, a piece of clothing, a lock of hair, or simply a stone carried from their homeland, as an offering and a symbol of leaving behind old patterns and limitations. This is considered a place of death and rebirth, where pilgrims symbolically die to their old selves and are reborn into greater wisdom and compassion. Standing at this pass, surrounded by prayer flags that snap and flutter in the fierce wind, you feel the profound truth of impermanence with every fiber of your being. The thin air makes each breath precious. The vast landscape stretches endlessly in all directions, and you understand viscerally that you are but a tiny speck in the grand tapestry of existence. Yet paradoxically, this recognition of your smallness doesn't diminish you, but expands your sense of connection to everything that is from Kailash. Your pilgrimage path leads to another jewel in Tibet's crown of sacred sites, Lake Manasaravar, whose name means Lake of Consciousness in Sanskrit. This vast body of water, sitting at over 15,000 feet above sea level, is considered the most sacred lake in the world by multiple religious traditions. Its waters are said to cleanse all sins and grant enlightenment to those who bathe in them with pure intention. Approaching Manasarovar at sunset, you witness one of nature's most spectacular displays. The lake stretches before you like a mirror of liquid light, perfectly reflecting the surrounding peaks and the vast dome of sky above. The water is so clear and still that it seems less like a physical lake than a window into another dimension, a portal between the earthly and the divine. Pilgrims who reach these shores often spend days here, camping along the water's edge, circumambulating the lake's perimeter and performing ritual ablutions in the sacred waters. Despite the altitude and the often harsh weather, there's something profoundly nourishing about this place that goes beyond physical comfort. The very air seems charged with spiritual energy, as if the prayers and devotions of countless pilgrims over countless centuries have sanctified the atmosphere itself. As you sit by the lake's edge in the gathering dusk, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant chanting of fellow pilgrims, you understand why this place has drawn seekers for millennia. Here, in this rarefied environment where earth and sky seem to merge, the ordinary boundaries of consciousness become permeable. The distinction between inner and outer landscape dissolves, and you experience directly what the mystics have always known, that the sacred is not separate from the world, but is the true nature of the world, hidden only by the veils of our own limited perception. Your journey through Tibet's sacred geography takes you to other places of power and beauty. Lake Yandrok, with its turquoise waters winding between snow-capped peaks like a giant serpent of liquid light, is revered as one of the 3 great sacred lakes of Tibet. According to legend, if its waters ever dry up, Tibet itself will become uninhabitable, for the lake is considered the life spirit of the Tibetan people made manifest in physical form. Standing on the shores of Yamdrok, you feel this connection between landscape and consciousness with startling clarity. The lake's impossible blue seems to reflect not just the sky above, but some deeper azure realm of pure awareness. Tibetans believe that the spirits of the departed gather here, and indeed, there's something about the quality of light and air that suggests the presence of other dimensions, other ways of being that normally remain invisible to ordinary perception. Practice of pilgrimage in Tibet extends beyond these famous destinations to include countless local sacred sites, caves where great masters meditated, springs with healing properties, rock formations that spontaneously display sacred images, trees and stones that are believed to be inhabited by protective spirits. Every valley has its own sacred geography, its own network of holy places connected by pilgrimage, paths that form a vast web of spiritual significance across the entire landscape. This understanding of the land as inherently sacred represents one of Tibet's greatest gifts to human consciousness. In a world where nature is too often seen as mere resource to be exploited, the Tibetan vision offers a radically different perspective, one in which every element of the natural world is recognized as having its own spiritual essence and right to exist. Mountains are not just piles of rock, but dwelling places of enlightened beings. Rivers are not just water, but the flow of wisdom itself. The earth is not dead matter, but a living mandala, a cosmic temple in which we are privileged to live and move and have our being. Walking the pilgrimage paths of Tibet teaches you to see with these eyes of reverence. Every stone you pass has been blessed by the feet of countless seekers. Every prayer flag you encounter carries the heartfelt aspirations of someone who came before you, hoping for the welfare of all beings. Every mani wall, those long stone structures built by pilgrims who carve sacred mantras on individual stones, represents thousands of hours of devotional practice, each carved syllable an offering to the benefit of all life, the mantra most Commonly found on these stones is Om Mani Padme Hum, the six-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Translated as Hail to the jewel in the lotus, this mantra embodies the essential teaching that enlightenment is found not by escaping the world, but by recognizing the sacred nature that exists within all phenomena, like a precious jewel hidden within the lotus of ordinary experience. As you walk these paths and see these mantras carved into the living rock, you begin to understand pilgrimage not as mere physical journey, but as a form of prayer made manifest through movement. Each step becomes an offering, each breath a blessing, each moment of awareness a small enlightenment that contributes to the awakening of all beings. The changing seasons add their own dimension to the pilgrimage experience. In spring, the high valleys come alive with wildflowers, poppies and primulas, edelweiss and alpine forget-me-nots, creating carpets of color that seem impossibly bright against the austere landscape. Summer brings clearer skies and warmer days, when pilgrims can travel more easily, and the mountain passes become accessible to all. Autumn paints the sparse vegetation in shades of gold and crimson, and the air becomes so clear that distant peaks seem close enough to touch. Winter transforms the landscape into a realm of pristine white and crystalline silence, when only the most dedicated pilgrims venture forth, their footprints the only marks on the snow-covered paths. Each season offers its own teachings and challenges. The abundance of summer reminds pilgrims of the richness that emerges when conditions are favorable, while the austerity of winter teaches about finding warmth and sustenance within oneself when external conditions are harsh. Spring speaks of renewal and the irrepressible force of life, while autumn whispers of impermanence and the beauty that comes from letting go. As your pilgrimage draws toward its completion, you find yourself changed in ways both subtle and profound. The physical challenges of high-altitude walking have strengthened your body and tested your endurance. But more importantly, they have taught you about the difference between comfort and happiness, between having and being. You've learned that joy doesn't depend on external circumstances, but arises from the simple fact of being alive and aware in this miraculous world. The solitude and silence of the pilgrimage path have given you a chance to hear the voice of your own deeper wisdom, often drowned out by the noise and busyness of ordinary life. In the vast spaces of the Tibetan plateau, where the horizon stretches endlessly in all directions, you've experienced a corresponding expansion of inner space, a loosening of the tight boundaries of the ego self, and a growing sense of connection to something infinitely larger and more magnificent than your individual concerns. The devotion and faith of your fellow pilgrims have shown you what human beings are capable of when they dedicate themselves to something greater than personal gain. You've witnessed acts of kindness and generosity that arise spontaneously when people are united by common purpose and mutual respect. You've seen how suffering, when embraced with the right understanding, can become a doorway to wisdom and compassion. Most importantly, you've experienced directly the truth that the sacred is not separate from the ordinary, but is the deepest nature of all existence. The mountains and lakes you've visited are not sacred because they are different from other places, but because they make visible the sacredness that is always present everywhere, usually hidden only by the limitations of our own perception. As evening falls and you prepare to rest after another day of sacred walking, let yourself feel the profound peace that comes from aligning your life with something eternal and true. The stars that appear one by one in the vast Tibetan sky are the same stars that have guided pilgrims for centuries, the same celestial lights that shine on all beings everywhere, reminding us of our fundamental unity despite apparent differences. Your own journey through life can be understood as a pilgrimage, each day an opportunity to walk with awareness and reverence, each encounter a chance to recognize the sacred in the ordinary, each challenge an invitation to deepen your faith and compassion. The geography of your own consciousness contains its own sacred sites waiting to be discovered, its own holy places that can only be reached through the practice of sincere seeking and devoted attention, not rest now in the vast silence of the sacred landscape, feeling yourself supported by the earth beneath you and blessed by the infinite sky above. Let the peace of the pilgrimage path settle into your bones, carrying you gently into dreams that are touched by the profound serenity of these holy places. Tomorrow's journey awaits, but for now, simply rest in the eternal present moment, knowing that you are exactly where you need to be, held in the embrace of the sacred geography that is your own awakening heart. As we return from the sacred paths of pilgrimage, our hearts still echoing with the profound silence of the holy places, we find ourselves drawn into the vibrant tapestry of daily life in ancient Tibet, here, in the valleys and villages nestled between the great peaks. A rich culture has flourished for centuries, one where the boundary between the sacred and the mundane dissolves like morning mist in the warming sun. Let yourself settle into the rhythm of Tibetan life as we explore this extraordinary civilization, where art is prayer, where oracles speak with the voices of gods, and where every aspect of existence is woven through with threads of spiritual meaning and ancient wisdom. This is a world where the mystical and the practical dance together in perfect harmony, creating a way of life that nourishes both body and soul. Picture yourself arriving at a traditional Tibetan village as the first light of dawn touches the prayer flags that flutter from every rooftop. The houses are built of stone and wood, their walls painted white with decorative borders of deep red and gold, rising 3 or 4 stories to flat rooftops where barley is dried in the autumn sun. Wisps of smoke curl up from chimneys, carrying the sweet scent of burning yak dung and juniper, the traditional fuels that have warmed Tibetan homes for countless generations. The sound that greets the morning is unlike anywhere else on earth. The deep, resonant calling of long horns from the local monastery, punctuated by the rhythmic beating of drums and the silvery chiming of bells. But mixed with these sacred sounds are the gentle noises of daily life beginning, the lowing of yaks being led to pasture, the splash of water being drawn from mountain streams, the soft murmur of morning prayers being recited in households throughout the village dot. As you wander through the narrow streets, still cool in the shadow of the surrounding peaks, you encounter your first glimpse of the artistic tradition that makes Tibetan culture so extraordinarily beautiful. Here, carved into the wooden doorframe of a modest home, you see intricate designs that seem to flow like frozen music, dragons that coil and dance, lotus flowers that bloom in eternal spring, and protective symbols that guard the threshold against negative influences. Every surface tells a story. Every decoration serves a purpose beyond mere beauty. The carved snow lions that flank the doorway are not simple ornaments, but powerful protectors. Their fierce expressions and playful poses embodying the perfect balance of strength and joy that characterizes enlightened consciousness. Their bodies are white as fresh snow, their manes green as mountain meadows, their eyes bright with the wisdom that sees through all illusion to the truth beyond. Moving deeper into the village, you come upon one of the most remarkable sights in all of Tibetan culture, an artist's workshop where the sacred paintings known as thankas are created. The artist, a man whose weathered hands speak of decades of devoted practice, sits cross-legged before a stretched canvas, his brush moving with the precision of a master calligrapher and the devotion of a monk at prayer. What you witness here is not merely the creation of religious art, but the practice of a profound spiritual discipline. Each thanka is painted according to strict iconographic rules that have been preserved for over 1,000 years, measurements and proportions that encode sacred geometry and cosmic principles. The artist begins each day with meditation and purification rituals, understanding that he is not creating mere decoration, but fashioning a support for meditation, a window into enlightened reality. Watch as he applies the delicate brushstrokes, that bring a Buddha figure to life on the canvas. The face emerges slowly, feature by feature, each element painted with exacting care. The eyes are painted last of all, for it is believed that when the eyes are completed, the deity truly inhabits the painting, transforming it from image to living presence. The moment when those eyes open for the first time is considered so sacred that it is often accompanied by blessing ceremonies and offerings. The colors he uses seem to glow with inner light, and indeed, they are made from materials that connect the earthly and divine realms. The deep blue that forms the hair comes from ground lapis lazuli, a stone so precious it was once worth more than gold. The brilliant red of the robes is made from cinnabar, the pure white from conch shells, the radiant gold from actual gold. Powder mixed with blessed water. Each pigment carries not just color, but spiritual significance, transforming the act of painting into a form of alchemy. As the thangka takes shape under the artist's devoted attention, you begin to understand the profound symbolism embedded in every detail. The lotus throne on which the Buddha sits represents the purity that can emerge from the mud of ordinary existence. The aureole of flames that surrounds the figure symbolizes the wisdom fire that burns away ignorance. The mudras, the precise hand positions, are not arbitrary gestures, but sacred sign language that communicates specific spiritual states and teachings. But the creation of thangkas is just one expression of Tibet's rich artistic tradition. In another corner of the village, you discover a workshop where artisans craft the ritual objects that are essential to Tibetan Buddhist practice. Here, master metalworkers shape brass and bronze into forms of extraordinary beauty and precision. Singing bowls that produce tones of crystalline purity, prayer wheels that spin with the smoothness of planets in their orbits, and ritual daggers whose intricate designs embody the fierce compassion needed to cut through spiritual obstacles. Each object is created not just as functional tool, but as a work of sacred art. The prayer wheels are engraved with mantras and beautiful Tibetan script, their surfaces decorated with the 8 auspicious symbols of Buddhism: the lotus, the endless knot, the golden fish, the victory banner, the dharma wheel, the conch shell, the precious umbrella, and the treasure vase. When spun, these wheels scatter blessings in all directions, the mantras contained within multiplying infinitely with each revolution. The singing bowls are crafted from alloys of 7 different metals, each corresponding to one of the classical planets and their associated spiritual qualities. When struck or played with a wooden mallet, they produce tones that seem to emanate not just from the metal, but from the very fabric of space itself. Sounds that can induce profound states of meditation and healing. Moving through the village, as the day progresses, you encounter the extraordinary phenomenon that sets Tibetan culture apart from virtually all others: the presence of oracles, human beings who serve as vessels for divine communication. This is not superstition or primitive belief, but a sophisticated system of spiritual guidance that has served Tibetan society for centuries, providing counsel in times of crisis and maintaining the delicate balance between the seen and unseen. Worlds. The oracle you encounter is a woman of middle years, her face serene in ordinary conversation, but marked by the subtle signs of one who has served as a bridge between dimensions. Several times each month, she enters into trance states, during which protective deities speak through her, offering guidance on matters ranging from personal problems to affairs of state. The process is not undertaken lightly. It requires years of training, purification practices, and the cultivation of extraordinary mental stability. Let yourself witness one of these remarkable sessions as the oracle prepares for trance in a small temple filled with the warm glow of butter lamps. The air is thick with juniper incense, and the sound of chanting creates a sacred container for what is about to unfold. The oracle sits quietly in meditation, her breathing becoming deeper and more rhythmic as she opens herself to serve as a channel for divine wisdom. Gradually, you sense a shift in the atmosphere of the room, as if the very air has become charged with invisible presence. The oracle's breathing changes, her posture transforms, and when she opens her eyes, it is clear that something extraordinary has occurred. The consciousness looking out through those eyes is no longer entirely human, but seems to partake of a vaster, more luminous awareness. When the oracle speaks, her voice carries an authority and wisdom that seems to come from beyond individual personality. The deity that speaks through her, perhaps Palden Lamo, the fierce protector goddess, or Dor Shubden, the guardian of Buddhist teachings, offers counsel that is both practical and profound, addressing the immediate concerns of questioners. While pointing toward deeper spiritual truths, the questions brought to the oracle reflect the full spectrum of human experience. Farmers seeking guidance about when to plant crops, families asking about auspicious dates for marriages, individuals requesting help with spiritual obstacles, and community leaders needing direction in times of difficulty. The responses that come through the oracle are not vague pronouncements, but specific, practical advice that demonstrates an intimate knowledge of both worldly affairs and spiritual principles. What makes this tradition so remarkable is not just the apparent communication with non-physical beings, but the way it integrates seamlessly into daily life, providing a living link between the ordinary world and the realm of enlightened consciousness. The oracles serve as a reminder that the boundaries we normally perceive between dimensions of existence are more fluid than we might imagine, and that wisdom and guidance are available from sources beyond our ordinary understanding. As evening approaches and the oracle returns to normal consciousness, you find yourself in the village's central courtyard where a festival is beginning to unfold. This is Losar, the Tibetan New Year, a celebration that embodies all the joy, artistry, and spiritual depth of Tibetan culture in one magnificent expression of communal festivity. The courtyard is transformed into a stage where dancers in elaborate costumes and masks perform ancient stories that connect the human and divine. Realms. The masks are works of art in themselves, carved from wood and painted in brilliant colors. They represent various deities, demons, and enlightened beings, each one created with the same devotional care as a sacred Thangka. The dance you witness is not mere entertainment, but sacred theater, a form of moving meditation that tells the eternal story of good and evil, wisdom and ignorance, the struggle between light and darkness that plays out in every human heart. The dancers move with a grace that seems to defy gravity, their elaborate robes flowing like liquid color, their movements precisely choreographed to embody specific spiritual meanings. The masks they wear transform them into living embodiments of archetypal forces. Here dances Mahakala, the great black protector, his fierce expression and powerful movements representing the wrathful compassion that destroys spiritual obstacles. There swirls Tara, the feminine principle of enlightened activity, her graceful gestures embodying the perfect balance of wisdom and compassion that characterizes awakened consciousness. But the most mesmerizing moment comes when the dancer representing Padmasambhava, the great tantric master who brought Buddhism to Tibet, takes center stage. His mask is a masterpiece of sacred artistry, its features radiating the fierce joy of one who has conquered both inner and outer demons. As he dances, he seems to embody the very essence of spiritual transformation, his movements telling the story of how ordinary consciousness can be transmuted into enlightened awareness through devotion, practice, and grace. The music that accompanies the dance is equally extraordinary, a complex weaving of sound that uses instruments found nowhere else on earth. The deep, haunting tones of long horns seem to emerge from the mountains themselves, while the sharp clarity of cymbals cuts through the air like lightning. Wooden drums beaten with curved sticks create rhythms that pulse like a cosmic heartbeat, and the silvery chiming of bells provides a celestial counterpoint that lifts the entire performance into realms of transcendent beauty. As you listen to this music, you understand that it too is more than entertainment. It is sonic dharma, sound, that has been specifically designed to affect consciousness, to create states of awareness that are conducive to spiritual realization. The proportions and intervals used in Tibetan sacred music are based on mathematical principles that mirror the harmonic structures of the universe itself, creating resonances that align human consciousness with cosmic rhythms. Between the dance performances, you sample the traditional foods that form another rich strand in the tapestry of Tibetan culture. The staple food is sampa, roasted barley flour that is mixed with yak, butter tea to form a nutritious paste that can sustain people through the harsh conditions of high-altitude life. But what might sound austere to foreign ears is actually deeply satisfying, providing both physical nourishment and a taste that connects every Tibetan to their ancestral homeland. The yak butter tea itself is an acquired taste for outsiders, but beloved by Tibetans, who drink it throughout the day as both nourishment and social ritual. The tea is churned in wooden vessels until it achieves a creamy consistency, then served in small bowls that are refilled as soon as they are emptied. Sharing tea is one of the fundamental acts of Tibetan hospitality, a way of creating bonds of friendship and community that transcend individual differences. During festival times, the simple daily fare is supplemented by special delicacies. Momos, the delicious steamed dumplings filled with yak meat or vegetables, and kaps, the deep-fried pastries twisted into intricate shapes that are both food and art. Each dish carries symbolic meaning as well as flavor. The circular shape of certain breads represents the wheel of Dharma, while the sweet taste of festival cookies symbolizes the joy that comes from virtuous action. As the night deepens and the formal performances give way to more spontaneous celebrations, you find yourself drawn into the circle dancing that is such a beloved part of Tibetan culture. The steps are simple enough for anyone to learn, but the real beauty lies in the way individual movement merges into collective rhythm, creating a living mandala of human bodies moving in harmony. The songs that accompany the dancing are ancient, their words carrying stories that have been passed down through countless generations. Some tell of legendary heroes and their adventures, others of great teachers and their wisdom, and still others of the simple joys and sorrows of everyday life. But all of them share a quality of profound acceptance and joy that seems to emerge from a deep understanding of life's fundamental nature. As you move with the dancers, feeling your individual consciousness merge into the collective celebration, you experience directly one of the most beautiful aspects of Tibetan culture: its ability to transform ordinary activities into expressions of spiritual communion. The dancing becomes a form of moving meditation, the singing a way of offering prayers, the shared food a sacrament that nourishes both body and soul. The children who participate in these celebrations are being initiated into more than cultural traditions. They are learning a way of being in the world that recognizes the sacred in the everyday, that finds joy in simplicity, and that understands celebration as a form of spiritual practice. Their bright faces, glowing in the light of the festival fires, represent the continuation of an ancient wisdom that has survived in these high mountains for over 1,000 years. As the festival gradually winds down and people begin to drift back to their homes, you find yourself sitting quietly by the dying embers of the celebration fire, reflecting on all you have witnessed. The art, the oracles, the music, the dance, the food, the community, all of it woven together into a seamless tapestry of meaning that transforms ordinary existence into something luminous and sacred. You understand now that Tibetan culture is not simply a collection of customs and traditions, but a complete way of life, designed to support and nurture spiritual development. Every aspect of daily existence, from the way houses are built to the way food is prepared, from the creation of art to the consultation of oracles, serves the ultimate purpose of awakening wisdom and compassion in the human heart. This is perhaps Tibet's greatest gift to the world, the demonstration that it is possible to create a civilization based not on the accumulation of wealth or the domination of others, but on the cultivation of inner qualities that benefit all beings. In a world often torn by conflict and confusion, the Tibetan example offers hope that humanity can choose a different path, one that honors both the practical needs of daily life and the deepest aspirations of the human spirit. As you prepare to rest after this rich immersion in Tibetan culture, let yourself feel grateful for having witnessed a way of life that integrates the sacred and mundane so beautifully. The images and sounds of the day settle into your consciousness like seeds of wisdom, ready to blossom into new understanding as you sleep. The art you have seen reminds you that beauty is not mere decoration, but a doorway to truth, that the creation of beautiful things is itself a spiritual practice. The oracles have shown you that wisdom and guidance are available from sources beyond ordinary understanding, if only we learn to listen with open hearts and minds. The music and dance have demonstrated that celebration can be a form of prayer. That joy shared in community becomes a force for healing and transformation. Rest now in the warm glow of this cultural richness, feeling yourself embraced by traditions that have nurtured and uplifted the human spirit for centuries. Let the gentle rhythms of Tibetan life carry you into dreams where art and spirituality dance together, where oracles speak wisdom in the language of the heart, and where every moment is touched by the profound beauty of a culture that has never forgotten its deepest purpose, the awakening of compassion and wisdom in service to all life. As the echoes of festival music fade into the mountain air, and the last embers of celebration fires settle into glowing ash, we find ourselves drawn toward one of the most extraordinary chapters in Tibet's long history. It is a story that begins with a child's pure heart and grows into an institution that would guide an entire nation through centuries of both triumph and trial, embodying the highest ideals of compassionate leadership in a world too often ruled by force and ambition. Let yourself settle into this tale as if sitting beside a wise grandmother who has witnessed the turning of ages, her voice soft with memory and rich with understanding. This is the story of how Tibet came to be led not by warriors or kings in the conventional sense, but by a succession of gentle souls who were believed to be the repeated incarnations of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of infinite compassion. Picture, if you will, a remote monastery in the early hours of dawn, sometime in the 15th century. The morning mist clings to the valley walls like silk scarves, and prayer flags flutter in the gentle breeze that carries the scent of juniper and wild mountain flowers. In a simple room within these ancient walls, an elderly monk sits in deep meditation, knowing that his time in this earthly form is drawing to a close. This is Jenden Drup, a scholar and teacher whose wisdom and compassion have touched countless lives. As he prepares for the great transition that awaits all beings, he leaves behind more than just teachings and memories. He leaves a promise, a commitment so profound that it will bridge the gap between death and rebirth, ensuring that his work of serving all sentient beings will continue unbroken across the generations. When Jenden Drup passes away peacefully in his meditation, those who loved and served him do not mourn as ordinary people might. Instead, they begin a sacred search, guided by dreams and omens, looking for the child in whom their beloved teacher's consciousness has taken rebirth. This is not mere wishful thinking or religious fantasy, but a practice based on the deepest understanding of the nature of consciousness and its ability to direct its own rebirth through the power of compassion and Bodhisattva vows. The search leads them eventually to a simple farmhouse, where a young boy displays unmistakable signs of being the reincarnation they seek. When shown objects belonging to his predecessor, mixed with similar items, the child unerringly chooses those that were his in the previous life. More importantly, he demonstrates the same gentle wisdom and natural compassion that characterized Jendandra. As if an old soul is shining through young eyes, this child, recognized as Jendan Gyatso, becomes the second Dalai Lama, though the title itself would not be conferred until later generations. What matters is not the formal recognition, but the living truth it represents, that the deepest commitment to serving others can transcend even death itself, manifesting again and again in new forms, but with the same essential purpose. As you contemplate this remarkable beginning, let yourself imagine the profound implications of a system of leadership based not on inheritance or conquest, but on the recognition of spiritual realization and the commitment to universal compassion. This is governance as it might exist in an enlightened world, where authority flows not from power, but from wisdom, not from the ability to dominate, but from the capacity to serve. The institution of the Dalai Lama reaches its full flowering during what historians call Tibet's Golden Age, particularly during the reign of the fifth Dalai Lama, Ngawang Labsang Gyatso, in the 17th century. This extraordinary figure, known to his people as the Great Fifth, embodies the perfect synthesis of spiritual realization and practical wisdom that would make Tibet a beacon of enlightened civilization for centuries to come. Imagine meeting this remarkable leader in the great hall of his residence, not yet the magnificent Patala Palace that would later bear his name, but already a center of learning and wisdom that draws seekers from across the Buddhist world. The Great Fifth is not what you might expect of a ruler. No crown adorns his shaved head, no sword hangs at his side, no throne elevates him above those who come seeking guidance. Instead, you find a man whose presence radiates the unmistakable quality of inner peace and profound wisdom. His robes are simple maroon wool, the same worn by any monk, but something in his bearing speaks of depths of realization that few human beings ever achieve. When he speaks, his voice carries the authority not of political power, but of lived truth, the kind of wisdom that emerges only from years of sincere practice and selfless service. Under the Great Fifth's guidance, Tibet experiences a renaissance that touches every aspect of society. This is not progress measured in conquest or accumulation, but the flowering of human potential in all its forms, artistic, intellectual, spiritual, and social. The monasteries become great universities where scholars from many traditions come to study and debate, creating a vibrant intellectual culture that synthesizes Buddhist philosophy with practical knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and governance. Let yourself wander through the great monastery of Drepung during this golden age, when it housed over 10,000 monks and served as a city of learning that rivaled any university in the world. The debate courtyards ring with the sound of philosophical discussion, the sharp clapping of hands that punctuates logical arguments, the laughter that erupts when a particularly clever point is made. This is not dry academic exercise, but living inquiry into the deepest questions of existence, conducted with the joy and passion of those who know that understanding leads to liberation. In the great assembly halls, thousands of monks gather for teachings and ceremonies, their unified chanting creating waves of sound that seem to shake the very foundations of the earth. But more impressive than the spectacle is the quality of attention and devotion. You witness minds trained through years of practice to remain focused and present, hearts open through meditation and study to embrace all beings with limitless compassion. The influence of enlightened leadership extends far beyond the monastery, walls into every corner of Tibetan society. Under the guidance of the Dalai Lama and his government of scholar monks, Tibet develops systems of law and administration based on Buddhist principles of justice and compassion. Disputes are resolved not through punishment, but through understanding, with the goal always being the restoration of harmony rather than the assertion of power. The economy flourishes not through exploitation, but through principles of interdependence and mutual support, trade routes connecting Tibet with India, China, and Central Asia carry not just goods but ideas, making Tibet a crossroads of cultures while maintaining its unique spiritual identity. The wealth that flows from this commerce is not hoarded by elites but channeled into the support of monasteries, the care of the poor and elderly, and the creation of great works of art and architecture. Most magnificent of all the achievements of this golden age is the construction of the Potala Palace, rising from the red hill in Lhasa like a mountain made of prayers in stone. Let yourself approach this architectural marvel in the soft light of early morning, when its white and red walls seem to glow from within, and the golden roofs catch the first rays of sunlight like captured fire. The Potala is more than just a residence for the Dalai Lama. It is a three-dimensional mandala, a sacred architecture that embodies the enlightened realm in physical form. Every measurement, every proportion follows sacred geometry that reflects cosmic principles. The building rises in 13 stories, representing the stages of the Bodhisattva path, while its 1,000 rooms contain libraries, chapels, meditation halls, and living quarters that serve as a complete spiritual city. As you climb the ancient stairs worn smooth by countless pilgrims, each step brings you closer, not just to the upper floors, but to an understanding of how architecture itself can become a spiritual practice. The builders who created this wonder were not mere craftsmen, but devotees who saw their work as an offering to the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Every stone was placed with the precision of a prayer, every beam carved with the devotion of a meditation. The rooms you enter seem to breathe with accumulated sanctity. In the private meditation chamber of the Dalai Lama, the very air seems charged with the energy of countless hours of practice. The walls are lined with images of past masters and protective deities, their painted eyes seeming to follow you with benevolent awareness. The simple cushion where His Holiness sits for daily meditation bears no special ornamentation, yet it seems to radiate an invisible power that speaks of the transformation of consciousness that has taken place there. The libraries of the Potala contain treasures beyond measure, not gold or jewels, but the accumulated wisdom of centuries, preserved in hand-copied texts. Here you find the complete works of Nagarjuna, Asanga, and other great Indian masters, translated into Tibetan with such precision that many Sanskrit originals have been lost while the translations remain. More precious still are the original writings of great Tibetan masters, their insights into the nature of mind and reality preserved like precious seeds that continue to sprout wisdom in every generation. In the great audience halls where the Dalai Lama receives visitors from across the Buddhist world, you witness a form of diplomacy unknown in other civilizations. Disputes between monasteries are resolved not through force, but through scholarly debate and appeals to shared principles of compassion. Foreign dignitaries are received with courtesy that seeks to understand and harmonize different perspectives rather than to dominate or convert. The ceremonies that take place in these halls embody the highest ideals of Tibetan Buddhism. During the great prayer festival established by Tsongkhapa, tens of thousands of monks gather to pray not for worldly success, but for the welfare of all beings throughout the universe. The collective power of so many minds focused on universal compassion creates an atmosphere of such profound peace that even hardened skeptics find themselves moved to tears. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Dalai Lama institution is how it manages to maintain spiritual authenticity while wielding temporal power. Unlike other religious traditions, where political authority often corrupts spiritual insight, the Tibetan system seems to enhance both through their integration. The Dalai Lama governs not as a king ruling subjects, but as a teacher guiding students, always with the understanding that his authority comes not from his position, but from his realization. This integration of spiritual and temporal authority reaches its zenith in the daily routine of the Dalai Lama during Tibet's Golden Age. Let yourself observe a typical day in the life of this extraordinary leader, beginning in the pre-dawn hours when he rises for personal meditation practice. Even surrounded by the responsibilities of governance, he maintains the discipline of a simple monk, beginning each day with several hours of prayer and contemplation. As morning arrives, he receives his teachers and engages in philosophical study and debate, for in the Tibetan system, learning never ends regardless of one's position or achievements. The humility with which he receives instruction, even while bearing ultimate responsibility for his nation's welfare, demonstrates the profound understanding that wisdom grows through openness rather than the accumulation of authority. The afternoon brings audiences with ministers and officials, but these are not mere administrative meetings. Each decision is considered not just in terms of immediate, practical effects, but in light of Buddhist principles of interdependence and compassion. Laws are crafted to support the spiritual development of citizens as much as their material welfare, creating a society where enlightenment is seen as the ultimate goal of human existence. Evenings are devoted to teaching and ceremony, for the Dalai Lama's primary role remains that of spiritual teacher, even while bearing political responsibility. In the great halls of the Podala, surrounded by thousands of students, he transmits the deepest teachings of the Buddha with the skill of one who has not just studied these truths, but realized them directly through practice. The teachings that flow from the Golden Age of Tibet represent one of humanity's greatest treasures, a complete system for the development of human potential that addresses every aspect of existence from the most practical to the most transcendent. The integration of philosophy and psychology, ethics and meditation, individual development and social responsibility creates a holistic approach to human flourishing that has rarely been equaled in world history. Under this enlightened leadership, Tibet becomes a sanctuary, not just for its own people, but for seekers from throughout Asia and beyond. Scholars travel for months across dangerous mountain passes to study in Tibetan monasteries. Artists come to learn techniques of sacred painting and sculpture that have been refined over centuries. Merchants find not just profitable trade, but examples of ethical business practices based on principles of mutual benefit rather than exploitation. The influence of Tibetan Buddhism spreads far beyond Tibet's borders during this period, carrying messages of compassion and wisdom to Mongolia, Central Asia, and beyond. But this expansion happens not through conquest or forced conversion, but through the attractive power of genuine spiritual realization. People are drawn to the Tibetan tradition because they witness its practical benefits, societies that are more peaceful, individuals who are more content, communities that care for their weakest, members with genuine compassion. As evening settles over the Potala Palace and butter lamps flicker to life in windows throughout Lhasa, you reflect on the extraordinary achievement represented by this golden age. Here, in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, human beings created a civilization based on the highest values of wisdom and compassion. They proved that it is possible to organize society around spiritual principles without sacrificing practical effectiveness. That leaders can be both deeply realized and remarkably capable. The legacy of this period extends far beyond Tibet itself, offering hope and inspiration to all who seek to create more enlightened forms of human organization. The example of the Dalai Lama institution demonstrates that authority based on wisdom rather than force is not only possible, but more effective in creating lasting peace and prosperity. The governmental system developed during Tibet's Golden Age, blending monastic wisdom with practical administration, offers insights that remain relevant for contemporary challenges. The emphasis on consensus building rather than majority rule, on long-term benefit rather than short-term gain, on the welfare of all beings rather than narrow self-interest, provides a template for governance that serves not just human needs, but the well-being of all life. As you prepare to rest after contemplating this remarkable period in human history, let yourself feel inspired by the possibility it represents. If such enlightened civilization could flourish in the harsh conditions of the Tibetan plateau, what might be possible in other times, and places where conditions are more favorable? The seed of wisdom planted during Tibet's golden age continues to bear fruit, offering guidance and hope to all who seek to create a more compassionate world. Rest now in the warm glow of this inspiring vision, feeling yourself connected to the lineage of wisdom and compassion that flows from the great masters of Tibet. To all who open their hearts to receive it, let the profound peace of enlightened leadership settle into your consciousness, reminding you that the same potential for wisdom and compassion that manifested in the Dalai Lamas exists within your own awakening heart. The golden light of this remarkable age in human history carries you gently into dreams where wisdom guides power, where compassion shapes policy, and where the highest spiritual ideals find expression in the practical affairs of daily life. Tomorrow's challenges await, but for now, simply rest in the eternal truth that enlightenment and effective action can dance together in perfect harmony when the heart is pure and the vision is clear. As the golden light of Tibet's great age begins to dim like the last rays of sunset touching the snow peaks, we find ourselves witness to one of history's most poignant chapters, the story of how a kingdom built on compassion and wisdom confronted the harsh realities of a changing world. This is not a tale of simple conquest or defeat, but something far more complex and profound, the encounter between two fundamentally different ways of understanding existence itself. Let yourself settle into this final part of our journey as you might sit beside a dying fire on a winter's evening, feeling both the warmth of what has been and the chill of what is to come. The story we are about to explore carries within it the seeds of both sorrow and hope, loss and continuity, endings that are also beginnings in ways we cannot yet fully understand. Picture, if you will, the great trading routes that for centuries had carried caravans across the roof of the world. These ancient paths wind through mountain passes, where the air is so thin that each breath requires conscious effort, past lakes that reflect the sky like mirrors made of liquid light, through valleys where yaks graze on sparse grass beneath, peaks that pierce the heavens themselves. For generations, these routes had been Tibet's connection to the outside world, threads of commerce and communication that brought tea from China, silk from Central Asia, spices from India, and ideas from across the Buddhist world. The traders who traveled these perilous paths were more than merchants. They were cultural ambassadors, carrying not just goods, but stories, philosophies, and dreams between civilizations. But as the centuries turned and the world beyond Tibet's borders grew more turbulent, these peaceful exchanges became increasingly difficult to maintain. The rise of new powers with different values and ambitions began to cast long shadows across the high plateau, bringing with them changes that would challenge everything Tibet had built over 1,000 years of patient cultivation. The first great disruption came from the north, where the Mongol armies of Genghis Khan and his successors swept across Asia like a storm of unprecedented ferocity. These were not the gentle traders or scholarly pilgrims that Tibet had welcomed for centuries, but warriors whose understanding of power rested on the sword rather than the sutra, on conquest rather than compassion. Let yourself imagine the fear and uncertainty that must have gripped the Tibetan people as reports filtered in of cities destroyed, populations scattered, and ancient ways of life swept away by the Mongol tide. Here was a civilization that had based its entire existence on the principle of nonviolence, confronting a force that seemed to embody violence itself. Yet even in this darkest hour, the wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism showed its profound strength. Rather than meeting force with force, the great Tibetan masters chose a different path, one that would ultimately transform their conquerors more than they themselves were transformed. When the Mongol prince Godin Khan summoned the scholar Sakya Pandita to his court, expecting to receive the submission of a defeated people, he encountered instead something he had never experienced before: the power of genuine spiritual realization. Watch as this extraordinary meeting unfolds in the great tent of the Mongol commander, surrounded by weapons of war and the artifacts of conquest. Sakya Pandita enters with neither defiance nor servility, but with the serene dignity of one whose authority comes not from armies, but from the depth of his understanding. He speaks to the prince not as conqueror to conqueror, but as teacher to student, offering the gift of Dharma to one who had known only the Dharma of the sword. What happens next is one of history's most remarkable transformations. The fierce Mongol warriors, whose very name had become synonymous with destruction, find themselves drawn to the profound peace and wisdom offered by their supposed subjects. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the conquerors become the converted, adopting Tibetan Buddhism not through force, but through the irresistible attraction of truth itself. This pattern would repeat itself again and again throughout Tibet's history. The miraculous alchemy by which apparent defeat became spiritual victory, by which military conquest was transformed into religious conversion. It speaks to something profound about the nature of real power, suggesting that force, no matter how overwhelming, cannot ultimately overcome the magnetism of genuine wisdom and compassion. But even as Tibet demonstrated this remarkable capacity for transforming its conquerors, the pressures from the outside world continued to intensify. From the east came the growing power of China, with its vast population and sophisticated administration. From the south came the British Empire, expanding northward from India in its relentless quest for trade routes and territorial control. Caught between these great powers, Tibet began to adopt a policy that would define much of its later history: a deliberate isolation from the outside world, a turning inward that sought to preserve its unique spiritual civilization by shielding it from external influences. This was not mere xenophobia or fear of change, but a conscious choice made by leaders who understood that their most precious treasure, the complete preservation of Buddhist wisdom and practice, could only be maintained by creating a protective barrier against the materialistic values that were transforming the rest of the world. Let yourself imagine Tibet during these centuries of self-imposed isolation, when the great monasteries became like islands of timeless wisdom in an ocean of change. Here, while the outside world rushed toward modernity with its machines and merchants, its wars and revolutions, the ancient rhythms of spiritual life continued unchanged. Monks still rose before dawn to chant the same prayers their predecessors had recited for centuries. Pilgrims still circled the sacred mountains with the same devotion their ancestors had shown. Artisans still created thankas and ritual objects, using techniques passed down through countless generations. There is something deeply moving about this deliberate preservation of tradition in a world increasingly obsessed with novelty and progress. Tibet became a living museum not of dead artifacts, but of living wisdom, a place where the deepest insights of human consciousness were kept alive and pure, like flames protected from the wind. Yet isolation, no matter how well-intentioned, comes with its own costs. Cut off from the rapid technological development occurring elsewhere, Tibet fell behind in the practical skills needed to defend itself in an increasingly interconnected world. The very spirituality that was its greatest strength became, in some ways, a vulnerability when confronted with powers that recognized no authority beyond physical force. The traditional Tibetan approach to conflict, seeking resolution through dialogue and mutual understanding, proved inadequate when dealing with adversaries who viewed compromise as weakness and peace as merely a temporary pause between conquests. The gentle methods that had successfully converted Mongol warriors and Chinese emperors were less effective against colonial powers. Driven by economic imperatives and racial theories that left little room for spiritual considerations. As the 19th century drew to a close, these pressures began to intensify with alarming speed. The British, seeking to secure their Indian empire against Russian expansion, began to view Tibet as a crucial buffer state that must be brought under their influence. The Chinese, weakened by wars and internal rebellions, nevertheless maintained their historical claims to suzerainty over the high plateau. Russia, expanding its influence across Central Asia, saw Tibet as a potential ally in its great game with Britain. For Tibet, surrounded by these competing powers and committed to a policy of neutrality and non-interference, the situation became increasingly untenable. Like a delicate flower caught in a storm, the peaceful kingdom found itself buffeted by forces beyond its control or full comprehension. The crisis came to a head in the early 20th century with the British invasion of 1904, led by Colonel Francis Younghusband. This was not a massive military assault, but something more subtle and perhaps more devastating, a demonstration of technological superiority that made clear how vulnerable Tibet had become in its splendid isolation. Picture the scene as Younghusband's small but well-equipped force advances across the Tibetan plateau, their modern rifles and artillery making quick work of any resistance offered by brave but under-equipped Tibetan defenders. The contrast could not have been more stark. On one side, warriors armed with swords and ancient firearms, fighting to defend a way of life based on spiritual values. On the other, soldiers equipped with the latest products of industrial civilization, representing a worldview that measured success in terms of territory conquered and trade routes secured. Yet even in this moment of apparent defeat, Tibet's essential nature shone through. The British soldiers, expecting to encounter a backward and superstitious people, instead found themselves charmed by the gentle dignity and profound wisdom of those they had come to subdue. Younghusband himself, a man who had dedicated his life to military conquest, found his worldview profoundly shaken by his encounter with Tibetan spirituality. In his later writings, the colonel would describe Tibet as a land where the very air seemed filled with religion, and his experience there would eventually lead him to abandon his military career in favor of spiritual seeking. Once again, Tibet had demonstrated its remarkable power to transform those who came as conquerors into something closer to disciples. But the political consequences of the invasion could not be overcome by spiritual influence alone. The treaties forced upon Tibet opened the kingdom to outside trade and influence in ways that would prove impossible to reverse. The isolation that had protected Tibetan culture for centuries was permanently breached, and with it came changes that would accelerate throughout the 20th century. The 13th Dalai Lama, Thupten Gyatso, recognized the magnitude of the challenge facing his nation and attempted to guide Tibet through a careful process of modernization that would preserve its essential spiritual character while developing the practical capabilities needed for survival in the modern world. This was an almost impossible balancing act. How to acquire the tools of modernity without being corrupted by its values. How to engage with the outside world without losing the precious isolation that had preserved Tibet's unique wisdom. His guidance, Tibet began to send students abroad to learn modern languages and technologies. A small but modern army was established, equipped with contemporary weapons and trained in modern military techniques. Telegraph lines were strung across the high passes, and attempts were made to establish diplomatic relations with foreign powers on terms of equality rather than submission. Yet even these modest steps toward modernization proved controversial. Within Tibet itself, many traditionalists feared that any accommodation with modern ways would inevitably lead to the corruption of the Dharma and the loss of Tibet's spiritual purity. They pointed to the example of other Asian nations that had adopted Western methods only to see their traditional cultures dissolve in the acid of materialism and individualism. This internal tension between preservation and adaptation would plague Tibet throughout the early 20th century, weakening its ability to respond effectively to external threats while its neighbors grew stronger and more aggressive. Like many indigenous cultures, confronting the spread of industrial civilization, Tibet found itself caught between the impossibility of remaining unchanged and the danger of changing too much. The death of the 13th Dalai Lama in 1933 marked the end of an era and the beginning of Tibet's final, most tragic chapter. The search for his reincarnation led to the recognition of a young boy in a remote farming village, a child who would become the 14th Dalai Lama and witness the end of independent Tibet as a political entity. Let yourself imagine this child, Tenzin Gyatso, growing up in the vast halls of the Potala Palace as the world around him lurched toward unprecedented changes. While he studied the ancient texts and received the traditional training of a Dalai Lama, outside forces were gathering that would soon make his world unrecognizable. The Second World War brought new urgencies and opportunities. Tibet, maintaining its policy of neutrality, tried to remain aloof from the conflict while quietly providing assistance to Allied forces. But the war's end brought new challenges as the map of Asia was redrawn by victorious powers with little regard for the wishes of small nations caught between great ones. The rise of communist China under Mao Zedong represented a threat of an entirely different magnitude from anything Tibet had previously faced. This was not a traditional empire seeking tribute or trade concessions, but a revolutionary movement committed to the complete transformation of Asian society according to modern ideological principles that left no room for traditional ways of life. The invasion of Tibet by the People's Liberation Army in 1950 marked the beginning of the end for the independent kingdom that had survived for over 1,000 years. This was not the gradual absorption that had characterized earlier Chinese involvement in Tibetan affairs, but a systematic attempt to remake Tibetan society from the ground up. The young Dalai Lama, barely 15 years old, found himself thrust into impossible circumstances, trying to negotiate for his people's survival while maintaining the spiritual responsibilities of his position. For several years, he attempted to find a middle way that would preserve Tibetan autonomy within the new Chinese state. But the fundamental incompatibility between communist ideology and Tibetan Buddhism made such accommodation ultimately impossible. Final crisis came in 1959, when a popular uprising in Lhasa was brutally suppressed and the Dalai Lama was forced to flee into exile in India. The image of this gentle young man, the embodiment of Tibetan hopes and dreams, crossing the Indian border under cover of darkness, remains one of the most poignant symbols of the 20th century's destruction of traditional ways of life. Even in this moment of apparent absolute defeat, something profound was beginning that would eventually carry Tibet's spiritual message far beyond the borders of the high plateau. The diaspora of Tibetan masters and practitioners, scattered by political upheaval across the world, would plant seeds of Dharma in soil that had never known them before. In the decades that followed, as the traditional Tibet of monasteries and pilgrimage paths was transformed beyond recognition, the essence of Tibetan wisdom began to take root in new environments. From the refugee settlements of northern India to the meditation centers of California, from the universities of Europe to the healing centers of Australia, the profound insights that had been cultivated in isolation for centuries began to offer their gifts to a world desperately in need of wisdom and compassion. The destruction of old Tibet was undeniably a tragedy of immense proportions, the loss of an entire way of life, the scattering of an ancient people, the silencing of voices that had spoken wisdom for 1,000 years. Yet from this destruction came an unexpected flowering, as Tibetan Buddhism spread across the globe in ways that would have been impossible had Tibet remained in its traditional isolation. The 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, became not just the leader of a people in exile, but a global voice for peace, compassion, and understanding. His teachings, once confined to the high valleys of Tibet, began to reach millions of people seeking meaning and purpose in an increasingly fragmented world. The very tragedy that scattered his people became the vehicle for spreading their most precious gifts to humanity as a whole. As we reach the end of our long journey through the history of ancient Tibet, let yourself feel both the sorrow of what was lost and the hope of what was preserved and transformed. The physical kingdom that once stretched across the roof of the world may have vanished like a dream at dawn, but the spiritual realm it nurtured continues to exist wherever human beings open their hearts to wisdom and compassion. The monasteries may be empty, the prayer flags may no longer flutter from Lhasa's rooftops, and the great debates may no longer echo through Drepung's courtyards, but the essential teachings that were cultivated in those sacred spaces live on in new forms and new places. Every meditation center that teaches Tibetan practices, every person who recites Om Mani Padme Hum with sincere devotion, every act of compassion inspired by the Dalai Lama's example represents a continuation of the ancient wisdom that once flourished between heaven and earth. The story of Tibet reminds us that some treasures are too precious to be destroyed by political upheaval or historical change. The deepest insights of human consciousness, once realized and preserved, possess a life of their own that transcends the circumstances of their origin. Like seeds scattered by the wind, they find new soil in which to grow, adapting to new conditions, while maintaining their essential nature. In this sense, the ancient Tibet we have explored together in these quiet hours continues to exist, not as a geographical location, but as a state of consciousness, a way of being in the world that recognizes the sacred in the everyday, that sees all beings as worthy of compassion, that understand wisdom and kindness as humanity's highest achievements. As you prepare to rest after this long journey through the centuries, let yourself feel grateful for having touched, even briefly, this remarkable civilization. The peace you've experienced in imagining the great monasteries, the wonder you felt in contemplating the sacred geography, the inspiration you've drawn from the examples of realized beings, all of this becomes part of your own inner landscape, enriching your consciousness with wisdom that transcends time and place. The gentle voice of ancient Tibet whispers still in the silence between thoughts, in the compassion that arises spontaneously when suffering is encountered, in the recognition that all beings, despite their apparent differences, share the same fundamental nature and the same deepest aspirations for happiness and freedom from suffering. Rest now in this understanding, feeling yourself connected to the long lineage of wisdom that flows from the snowy peaks of the Himalayas to wherever sincere seekers gather to cultivate love and understanding. Let the profound peace of those high places settle into your heart, carrying you into dreams where ancient wisdom dances with present need, where the treasures of the past illuminate the path toward a more compassionate future. The kingdom between heaven and earth lives on in every moment of genuine kindness, every flash of true understanding, every heart that opens to embrace the suffering world with infinite love. In this way, ancient Tibet is not lost but transformed, not ended, but begun anew in the awakening consciousness of all who have been touched by its timeless message of wisdom and compassion. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that some things are too beautiful, too true, too essential to ever really disappear. They simply change form, like snow becoming water, becoming cloud, becoming snow again, eternal and ever-present in the vast mandala of existence that connects all beings in one seamless web of interdependent love. And so our long journey through the sacred realm of ancient Tibet draws to its close, like a meditation that has carried us far beyond the boundaries of ordinary time and space. We have walked together through valleys where prayer wheels spin in mountain breezes, climbed paths worn smooth by countless pilgrims seeking truth, and rested in monasteries, where wisdom has been preserved like precious jewels for over 1,000 years. In these quiet hours, you have been more than a listener. You have been a pilgrim of the heart, allowing your consciousness to expand beyond its familiar boundaries and touch something timeless and profound. The images that have unfolded in your mind's eye are not mere stories from a distant past, but living teachings that continue to breathe and offer their gifts to all who approach with sincere hearts. Let yourself rest now in the vast silence that surrounds all stories, the pregnant emptiness from which all adventures arise and to which they eventually return. Feel how your own awareness has been touched and transformed by this journey, how the peace of those high places has settled into your bones, how the wisdom of ancient masters continues to whisper in the spaces between your thoughts. Tibet, that extraordinary land suspended between heaven and earth, has always been more than a geographical location. It is a state of consciousness, a way of being that recognizes the sacred in every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. The kingdom we have explored together exists not only in the historical past, but in the eternal present of awakened awareness, accessible to anyone who learns to see with the eyes of compassion and wonder. The snow peaks that pierce the sky like prayers made manifest, the crystal lakes that mirror infinite space, the prayer flags that carry blessings on every wind, all of these continue to exist in the realm of the heart, where true refuge is always found. The monasteries may be empty, the ancient ways may have changed, but the essential teachings live on wherever human beings choose love over fear, wisdom over ignorance, compassion over indifference. As sleep begins to call you home to that other country where dreams unfold like lotus flowers in moonlight, carry with you the profound peace we have discovered together. Let the gentle rhythm of Tibetan life pulse through your dreams, the soft shuffle of robes on monastery floors, the whispered mantras that bless all beings, the deep silence of meditation that connects all hearts in one seamless web of understanding. Remember that you too are a pilgrim walking the sacred geography of your own awakening. Every step you take in life can be a prayer, every breath an offering, every moment of awareness a small enlightenment that contributes to the healing of our wounded world. The same Buddha nature that flowered in those high valleys exists within your own consciousness, waiting to be recognized and nurtured with the same devotion that Tibetan masters have shown for centuries. The ancient ones who walked before us on this path of wisdom have left footprints not in snow that melts or stone that crumbles, but in the very fabric of consciousness itself. Their realizations become our inheritance, their compassion the wind beneath our wings, their example the light that guides us home to our own deepest nature. Let the mantra that has echoed through our journey continue to resonate in the quiet chambers of your heart. Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel in the lotus, the sacred hidden within the ordinary, the enlightenment that blooms wherever sincere seeking meets infinite grace. Each repetition of these ancient syllables connects you to the unbroken lineage of awakening that flows like a river of light from the earliest Buddha to this very moment of peaceful rest. As your breathing deepens and your body settles into the embrace of sleep, feel yourself supported by the accumulated merit of countless beings who have dedicated their lives to the welfare of others. Their blessings surround you like a mandala of protection. Their wisdom illuminates your dreams. Their love carries you safely through the gentle passage from waking into the realm of rest. The kingdom between heaven and earth lives on in every act of kindness, every moment of genuine presence, every heart that opens to embrace the mystery of existence with wonder and gratitude. In this way, our journey together never truly ends, but continues to unfold in ways both seen and unseen, touching and transforming all who come into contact with the precious Dharma we have shared. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that you carry within your own consciousness the same vast sky that arches over the Himalayas, the same clear light that illuminates mountain peaks at dawn, The same boundless compassion that has motivated bodhisattvas throughout the ages to dedicate their lives to the awakening of all beings. The prayer flags of your own aspiration flutter in the wind of grace, carrying blessings to all corners of existence. The monastery of your heart remains always open, its doors welcoming all who seek refuge from the storms of confusion and fear. The pilgrimage path stretches endlessly before you, each day offering new opportunities to walk in the footsteps of the wise and compassionate ones who have shown us the way home. Rest now in the profound silence that cradles all sounds, the luminous darkness that gives birth to all light, the infinite space of awareness in which all dreams unfold and dissolve, like clouds in the vast sky of being. Let the peace of ancient Tibet carry you gently into the realm of healing sleep, where body and mind restore themselves in preparation for tomorrow's continuation of the endless journey toward awakening between heaven and earth. In the sacred space of this eternal moment, all beings rest in the embrace of boundless love. All stories find their completion in the recognition of the one heart that beats in all creatures. All journeys lead home to the understanding that we have never been separate from the peace we seek, the wisdom we long for, the love that is our deepest nature.